I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 42 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Today's meeting, pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, May 26, 2026, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, May 7th, 2026, the committee commenced consideration of Bill C-30, an act to implement certain provisions of the Spring Economic Update tabled in Parliament on April 28th, 2026. I would like to welcome our many witnesses, but I'm not going to go through and list all of them because there are many from different departments. And so I just invite committee members to take a look at the list of witnesses that we have from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Department of Employment and Social Development, from the Department of Finance, the Department of Health, and the Department of Transport. Given that this is, that we have many officials joining us, there won't be any opening statements. We'll go straight into questions from members. If you have a question specifically to address to a witness, we would ask that that witness comes up and everyone is prepared to come up quickly to answer questions. But for witnesses, I would ask that you just state your name and your position for the purposes of the interpreters before you answer the question. So without further ado, we will commence with Mr. Hallan, who I understand is sharing his time with Mr. Barlow for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to put a motion on notice, and then I'll pass the time on to Mr. Barlow, that given that Canada's economy is in recession, the Standing Committee on Finance schedule is a meeting with the Minister of Finance and National Revenue one time per month, as long as the Canadian economy remains in a recession.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hallan. Mr. Barlow, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My questions will be mainly for CFIA and Health, so if CFIA can.
Take it, you're going to stop the clock. Right? Oh. Pull that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Holmes, and I'll let you get settled in there, but you won't need your apparatus for me, but maybe for someone else, and I appreciate that. My first question for CFIA is certainly some changes in the Food and Drug Act would allow for some decisions to be made through a food security lens is what is being proposed within the changes. Can you point out any metrics or regulations specifically in C-30 that would hold CFIA accountable to ensure decisions are being made with that economic lens?
Thank you, Chair. Jay Holmes for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. I am the Executive Director of Business Enablement and Regulatory Services. Thank you for the question. The amendments proposed in Bill C-30 respond to the recent parliamentary report and to stakeholder requests to broaden or to clarify that the CFIA's mandate, in addition to reflecting in our decisions animal health, plant health, and food safety, that the CFIA will also consider situations where food security may be affected regionally or across the country, and consider or formalize its consideration of economic factors when it's making decisions. And so what this will allow the CFIA to do is broaden out those considerations or formalize its consideration of those factors as it is making those decisions that keep as a bedrock or as a foundation the primacy of animal health and plant health and human safety.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Holmes, but I guess the reason for my question is when we had you at Agriculture Committee a number of months ago, we asked you if there was any appetite in CFIA to change its mandate to include an economic lens. At that time, you said no, that you felt that CFIA was doing its job properly. So although C-30 is trying to give you consideration to make that, is there anything in C-30 that holds CFIA accountable to ensure the decisions that are making are used that economic lens and a lens on food security? Is it prescribed specifically that you must meet these decisions at this time?
Thank you, Chair. The responses and the information that was provided previously at committee remains accurate in the sense that it noted that the the CFI, the preamble to the CFI Act did include a mention, or does include a mention of economic factors. What Bill C-30 will do will formalize that and clarify that in the text of the CFIA Act more properly to include factors such as supporting regulatory compliance, contributing to public awareness and consumer protection, considering national and regional economic and food security factors. So those will be formally included in the text of the bill rather than the preamble.
Right.
Yes.
I think that's a big change to take it in the text, not in the preamble. But I think what's missing here, again, is some metrics to hold CFIA accountable to make sure it makes decisions with that lens. And hopefully the minister will ensure that that happens. Now, another big statement within all of the testimony at that report of which you are alluding to was a culture change within CFIA. Is there anything within C-30 that ensures that leadership makes that culture change within CFIA to ensure that those decisions are made with that economic lens?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with the words that are in the bill, which I've mentioned, that formalizes the factors we'll consider. Beyond that, and going beyond the words in the bill, I can tell you that today the CFI has already created the directorate I'm part of, Business Enablement and Regulatory Services, and it has three areas of focus that will put that into practice at the CFI, which may be getting at the culture change that you allude to. Number one, this directorate is taking a very close and formalized look at when we make regulatory changes, are we considering all the appropriate factors such as economic factors? That's this directorate is also the focus at the CFI of our work to formalize and to continue to look at red tape.
Sorry, Mr. Holland. So basically the directorate is going to be established to try and enforce those culture changes within CFA. So hopefully the more bureaucracy doesn't lead to loss of focus. But to Health Canada, I just had a couple of questions for you as well. In C-30, you were talking also about making decisions on economic and food security lens. Does C-30 include any provisions on harmonization of regulations with trusted jurisdictions?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. It doesn't explicitly include provisional changes related to foreign decisions in international jurisdictions. However, the pesticides program does currently work very closely with other international partners on joint reviews.
Thank you. Thank you. So there's nothing in there that, because PMRA's decision-making is falling further and further behind in terms of the timeline. So companies do not want to come to Canada because of the regulatory red tape they have to go through. Is there anything within C-30, including any regulations that will expedite access for producers of vital crop protection products, veterinary medicine, fertilizer, or seed varieties for Canadian producers, that expedites access to those products that are already approved in trusted jurisdictions?
Thank you for the question. Explicitly in Bill C-30, the focus is on economic, the inclusion of economic and food security in our mandate. However, that said, pesticides, Health Canada has a number of changes that we are undertaking as part of the red tape reduction that do focus on improving performance and addressing and making sure that we're bringing and supporting innovation in Canada.
Thank you, Ms. LaForce. Thank you, Mr. Barlow. That concludes your time. We're going to continue now with Mr. Letao for 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I would like to talk to our friends at the Department of Finance, please.
Et dans le...
And to be more precise, on the economic update and the increase of revenue that we have noticed.
Ministry of Finance that will be coming.
Très bien, merci beaucoup, messieurs.
Thank you, gentlemen. In the economic update, we have noticed that the published deficits were smaller than those forecasted during the November budget. One of the reasons behind this lower deficit is because state revenues were higher than expected. Can you explain to us why that is?
Gervais Coulombe, directeur général.
I am the Director General on the excise tax. We are here to answer questions related to Bill C-30. So I'm not certain if in this panel we have officials who were directly involved in the creation of Schedule 1 and of the fiscal framework. With me is a colleague who told me the answer is no, because this is not a question that's directly related to Bill C-30. I'm afraid that we will have to give you the answer in writing.
L'augmentation provenait
That increase
sur le revenu.
is mainly due to the increase on the income tax. That was higher than expected because the economy was stronger than expected. 2025 was economically a fairly reasonable year. But let us get back to the topic of the day. I want to talk about the Investment Canada Act and the changes related to the ownership of Canadian businesses, as well as the creation of Canadian businesses by no Canadians. We will also change the Banking Act. We will ensure that foreign banks will need to operate differently. Can you briefly explain this to us? Explain those changes to us, please. Thank you.
Bonjour, Justin.
Hi, Justin Brown, Senior Director at the Department of Finance. Section 1 of Part 3 will amend the Banking Act in order to ensure that investment in non-investment activities by foreign banks and their associated entities will be subject to a national security review under federal laws related to federal institutions and investment acts to ensure everything is properly done. Does that only apply to credit activities or loans, or also related to direct investments? I'm talking about foreign banks. It would apply to any investment in non-financial activities. Once again, the goal is to ensure that investments are subject to a review, either under the Canada Investment Act or under one of the Financial Institution Acts, such as the Banking Act. So that's something that used to not exist. So when foreign banks, say, funded the purchase of a Canadian company, the change of ownership, of course, can be reviewed to see if it's good for the national interest. But the activity of the bank itself was not supervised. Is that it? And now that is added to our toolbox. Currently, there are national security reviews, either through the Investment Canada Act or the Banking Act. However, there are loopholes or problems, and some entities are not subject to either act. And sometimes the investment is subject to two different reviews. So the bill seeks to provide more clarity. So that an investment is subject to either a review pursuant to the Investment Canada Act or the Banking Act, but neither and not both. There are also amendments to other acts. I'm talking about the Payments Act.
Donc, bonjour.
Hello. So now we're asking the Bank of Canada to be a key player in the payments system. Can you quickly summarize what is being added by C30? You only have 15 seconds. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Nicolas Marion. I'm the Senior Director responsible for payments policy. In C30, cost recovery measures in different acts are consolidated under the Bank of Canada Act. Thank you, Mr. Letao.
To Mr. Lemire, I would just like to say to Department of Finance officials, and it's not just ask that in future we make sure that we have officials that can answer all of those questions. Thank you. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur.
We will now continue with Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Madam Chair. If Mr. Countryman from Department of Finance can come, that would be great.
Je ne pensais pas que vos collègues allaient vous abandonner comme ça.
I didn't think your colleagues would abandon you like that. My first question, as someone who's responsible for federal-provincial relationships, in the spring economic update, the government earmarked $6 billion for a Canada Strong through salary subsidies. What kind of pre-consultations did you do with provinces? Did you consult the government of Quebec before creating this measure? Thank you for your question. I am not responsible for that part of the spring economic update, but I can consult my colleagues to provide you with an answer. Great, that will be really appreciated if you can give us the answer by writing. I don't think there's anyone else in the room who is responsible for that part. Do you know that since 1997, there was an agreement between Quebec and Ottawa about on training, and the measure can create issues because training is a Quebec jurisdiction. Once again, I'm not a specialist in that field, so I cannot answer. So I'm still thinking about federal-provincial relations. So personally, you did not tell the Department of Finance on the sensitive aspects of intergovernmental relations and the government's relation with the government of Quebec. I'm always talking about the training programs where they are injecting money into a jurisdiction that belongs to Quebec. Did you raise any flags in your duties to say that this may create reactions within Quebec? At Finance, we mostly take care of transfer payments. When it comes to some other programs, it's not necessarily under our purview. Were you surprised when the Minister of Labor, Mr. Jean Boulet, who is not known for being someone who supports Quebec separatism, so a federalist, said that he was surprised by the federal government's stepping into this jurisdiction? Once again, I don't know this file too well. It's not a question I can answer. Can you confirm that it's not the government's will to impose conditions on Quebec based with various sums? In other words, is the government ready to allow Quebec to have the ability to opt out with no strings attached? Once again, I am not the person who's responsible for this. This is something administered by Employment and Social Development Canada. if you can forward my questions to the people who can answer these questions and then give us the answer back in writing, I will really appreciate that. So how do you plan on collaborating with the government of Quebec in order to ensure that the certifications given by the Quebec government is recognized just like a Red Seal trade recognition? This is a sensitive issue. It is a sensitive issue in many regions in Quebec. I'm, of course, talking about temporary foreign workers. They require measures such as labor market impact assessments. I'm sure that you are certain that the Quebec government already does that to identify major labor shortages or labor issues that need to be filled by temporary foreign workers. LMIAs are required by the federal government, but right now that just creates way more red tape. I understand that some SMEs want to be productive, but they will need to wait several months for the LMIA. It takes a lot of administrative measures simply because they need to hire someone. Because in my region, Abitibi-Témiscamingue, it's very hard for them to find someone who necessarily wants to work. So they turn towards immigration, but the process is very onerous. As someone who's responsible for intergovernmental relationships, are you looking at the fact that Quebec is already assessing the labor market and that what they do in Quebec is sufficient instead of requiring another burdensome administrative process that is jeopardizing our company's productivity? Maybe you can suspend LMIAs for a while to make our businesses more productive. Are you open to that? Once again, this is a program by another department. Well, sorry, maybe I thought that you had a more important role than you actually have, but I will be counting on you to provide me the answers to my questions. Thank you.
Oh, merci, Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. We'll now move to Mr. Mazer, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Holmes, I'm looking for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And the Department of Health will also come up too. That'd be good. I see there's one mic on there. That's okay. Get your mic on. Yeah. There we go. Mr. Holmes, Bill C-30 uses the term food security. However, that term is not defined in the legislation. What is the definition of food security according to the government?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. In developing this, we did note that there are several definitions of food security used by different organizations, and it was chosen in drafting the bill to choose one that was more all-encompassing in order to not bind our hands.
So what was that definition?
Food security, in terms of the CFIA's new mandate, is for us to consider, or considering food security means we'll have to look at issues of having enough food to eat in a particular region or across the country in a specific situation. I think that is the foundation of it, is having access to food for Canadians, but noting too that there are a number of definitions of this term.
So can we get any more, what's it mean to you? Like, if you were reading that and having to defend it as you are now, what speaks to Canadians when it comes to food security? We do have 2 million people lined up at a food bank right now, so I'll just remind you, food is kind of scarce in Canada, unbelievably so. So, under food security, what would that definition be for this government?
Thank you, Chair. I can give you two examples of where the CFI dealt with food security issues in the past. Number one, during the floods in BC, the CFI was made aware that there was the potential for a shortage of food in areas of British Columbia. The CFI was able to take steps to make sure that enough food was available to eat.
I got another definition here for you. So, Mr. Holmes, Bill C-30 uses the term economic security. However, the term is not defined in legislation. So what is the definition economic security according to the government?
In the future, when the CFI has in the past, or in the future when we do consider or bring
Is it the past or the
economic
future? What are we talking about here? We're talking about Bill C-30.
with respect to Bill C-30, when the CFI makes regulatory decisions, the CFI will consider economic factors that are brought to our attention, such as the effect on businesses, the potential for disproportionate effect on small businesses of certain decisions that will be considered, along with what are our paramount considerations: food safety, animal health, and plant health, to make sure that the CFI maintains a strong science regulatory base to its decisions, while also considering these relevant factors. Thanks.
Mr. Holmes, also Bill C-30 uses the term seriously detrimental infestation. However, the term is not defined. So what is the definition of seriously detrimental infestation according to the government?
Thank you, Chair, for that. I'll have to defer to my colleagues at Health.
Yes, hello. So Shannon LaForce from the Pesticides Program at Health Canada. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Right now, we do have a definition in our legislation that defines it under as part of our emergency registrations. However, in the points for the Bill C-30, we're currently in the process of more formally defining those. They will be defined in policy. It was intentional not to have put them in the wording of the legislation, but we are currently working to make sure that they're defined in policy and have committed to putting that in writing.
So they're not defined right now?
They're currently under development. They're not finalized.
So you're asking us to make a decision on a legislation when we have no definitions, or have a definition of release for one of them that we found out. How many other definitions are not defined yet? Obviously, we got question marks around the other questions I just asked: economic security, food security. Like, there is no definition for this.
We're going to be building on the definitions and the policy and legislations that we currently have in place. But in the context of Bill C-30, we are refining those definitions in the new context of the bill.
Okay, thank you. Mr. LaForce, the Canada Disability Benefit uses the same definition of disability as Accessible Canada Act, which includes people with episodic disabilities like multiple sclerosis. Yet the disability tax credit, which you need to access the Canada Disability Benefit, still requires that a person demonstrate and I quote, marked restriction 90% of the time. So you have a situation where the government's own legislation says someone with MS qualifies for the Canada Disability Benefit, but the CRA's interpretation of disability tax credit says they may not qualify for the very credential they need to access. Why is this not addressed?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I am from the Pesticides Regulatory Program and not the pharmaceutical or the other part of health. So unfortunately, I'm not the expert that can answer that question.
Mr. Mazier, we're going to have to conclude there. That concludes your time, but we can perhaps ask Health Canada to give you a written response for that.
Yeah,
Thank you,
that
Mr.
would be
Mazier.
great. People with MS
so we're going to
come into my
continue
office and
now
ask
with
for that as well.
Monsieur Lavoie pour 5 minutes. Merci.
Mr. Lavoie, 5 minutes, please. I have a question for the Department of Finance first, and then Transport Canada, so get ready.
Finance.
Anyone from Finance? I don't think they're in a rush.
Finance officials could please make your way up as soon as possible. Thank you.
Alors bonjour, merci d'être là.
Hello, thank you for being here. So, we talked about interprovincial barriers and removing them. It was also brought up at the spring economic update. Interprovincial trade is seen as a really important part to ensure economic growth. Do you have an update? Do we see concrete advances and progress? What's the current status? Thank you for your question. I fear that once again, even though this is a measure that was in the economic update, I don't think that you're referring to a specific measure of C3. I cannot bring my entire department with me. So yet the economic update said that interprovincial trade is going to be a very important source of economic growth. The bill here implements certain measures. Well, tell me about those measures. Please go ahead. For example, in Part 1, there are measures related to the Income Tax Act. It amends barriers related to labor mobility, as well as related to cumulative capital gains. Talk about labor. What are the timelines? So that our businesses can see something concrete, so that our economic development can see something concrete. I am Mark Maxon, Senior Director, Employment and Education, Personal Income Tax Division. This bill talks about the labor mobility deduction. The limits for the deduction are changed from $4,000 to $10,000, and the distance capped has been moved from 150 kilometers to 120 kilometers. So that'll be easier for workers to access this deduction. Thank you. Something else. On the topic of affordability, my writing is Beauport Limoilou, and the number one source of worry is cost. What part of this economic update will have the most amount of direct impact on my constituents? What do you think is the most direct and concrete measure that can ensure that that can ensure that people can see something quickly? In C30, there is a measure that's very important. I'm talking about the temporary suspension of the excise tax on gas and diesel. The suspensions will happen over around 20 weeks and will allow people to save around 10 cents per liter. So for someone who needs to fill 50 liters of gas, they may be able to save up to $5.75 per full tank of gas. These are measures administered by the CRA, and they are in C30. So in one of the neighborhoods in my riding, people don't have cars. They use public transit or they walk around. What measures exist for them? This measure is still good for them because transportation costs will still drop through the supply chain, or rather they will not increase as the particular circumstances in the Middle East has caused the price of gas to increase. So the government has taken measures. The reductions in the Excise Tax Act also have measures related to beer, for example. There is a legislative agenda, and there were measures in the bill. For example, in the 2025 Budget Implementation Act that has been recently adopted. Thank you, Mr. Lavoie. Before we proceed with Mr. Lemire, I would simply like to remind members that if you read questions, please read them slowly or a little bit slower for the interpreters. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have questions for the Canadian Food Inspection, Agency. So, Mr. Holmes and Ms. Wild, please.
En espérant que l'exercice m'amènera à avoir plus de réponses que...
In the hopes that you will provide me with more answers than the previous set of witnesses. It's a high bar. I was sarcastic. So thank you for being here. In parts 5 and G of part 11.4 of the CFA Act, that's in C30, there is the promotion of trade, and the agency's mandate will also consider national security. Back in the day, it was just about public health. So they're opening this new breach in your mandate. And how will that change the nature of your day-to-day work, especially when it's related to pesticides?
Chair, the translation doesn't seem to be...
This is a...
Sorry.
Testing 1 2 1 2, testing the interpretation 1 2 1 2. Testing. This is the interpreter testing. I think.
Je vais aller à la question. Façon l'insertion.
Un instant, si vous pouvez ralentir un peu pour les interprètes.
If you can slow down for the interpreters, please. How will the introduction of economic considerations change your work, especially when it comes to pesticides?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for the question.
Pesticides day-to-day work. What these provisions in Bill C-30 will do will allow us to do. We've always had the mandate to be able to look at the value of a product when we review it and register it. This additional amendments will allow us to ensure that we do the necessary economic analysis in order to ensure that review of decisions and understand the nature of the impact of a crop or the loss of a crop should a decision be negative. So from a day-to-day activity standpoint, this will make sure that we are broadening the scope of what we review and the analysis that we put out as part of our decisions to ensure that economics is more forefront without compromising health and environments, because that is always paramount.
Parce qu'évidemment, avec les coupures en sciences et recherches,
and of course, with cuts to science, including the Longueuil Center, it is sending the opposite message. We talk about diversifying markets. New EU pesticide regulations are more stricter than the ones in Canada. So this means that Europe may close its doors to many Canadian agricultural products. So when we're talking about diversifying markets, why are we reducing our market access to Europe when they are a reliable market? Did you know that the French National Assembly voted to ban? That is all for time. Madam Speaker, if you did not listen to me, I re-asked my question because it was not well interpreted. I was never interrupted before. We restarted the time. Please show me, because on my phone I see 2 minutes 20 on my clock. I have 3 minutes and 2. Thank you. I'm not sure if you did that to anyone else.
For 5 minutes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We can just leave everybody here. To the PMRA, Bissell Force, the approval times of PMRA have doubled, become worse under the transformation agenda. The AFC puts that number at about a $50 billion cost to Canadian agriculture. Canada is 32 out of 38 OECD countries when it comes to agricultural regulatory burden. We are number 21 when it comes to active ingredient registration. Many companies do not want to come to Canada as a result of these numbers. It just takes too long to access this market. So is there anything within C30 that sets targets for PMRA in terms of improving its decision-making process to improve those numbers, to come up from 32 out of 38 in the OECD and to come up from number 21 in terms of active ingredient registrations in Canada? Are there any specific targets in C30 that holds PMRA accountable for the decisions it's making?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Bill C-30 does include, as stated, changing the mandate to include a provision that is requiring PMRA, Pesticides Regulatory Directorate, to consider economic considerations of food security.
Thank you, but it's, again, we're all these things about consider. Is there a definitive target within C-30 that says you must meet this decision timeline or approval timeline? We want to see us be this number over number 32 out of 38. Are there specific targets set for PMRA?
Hi, this is Jordan Hansey from PRD. So those targets are part of the User Fees Act. So they already exist for PMRA. They're binding, and if we miss targets, then we have to refund a portion of the application fee. So yes, they do exist. They're not in C30, but they exist through the Users Fee Act.
Well, Mr. Hansey, then PMRA is making a lot of refunds. Lastly, to CFIA, Mr. Holmes, we have not, as CFIA, inspected the animal health protocols in the Mercosur countries since 2018. Has CFIA done any impact analysis in terms of a potential animal disease outbreak in Canada as a result of the Liberal government signing the Mercosur trade agreement, especially when it comes to Canadian livestock?
Thank you, Chair. I note that the discussion today is focused on Bill C-30. This does sort of tread outside of that.
Yeah, but you're here. Thought I'd ask you the question.
Our trade colleagues would be able to respond to that, and we can get back to you with an answer on that in due course. Thanks.
I'll pass my remaining time to Mr. Mazier.
This question is for Health Canada. The government provided $4.5 million tax dollars to an organization called My Safe Society. The purpose of this money was to fund vending machines that dispense opioid drugs across Canada. Are there any opioid vending machines still operating in Canada today?
Point of order.
Mr. Turnbull?
I think today's conversation is about C30, which has a number of, I don't believe this question is relevant. Maybe you could ask Mr. Mazier if he can pose a relevant question.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. I would just ask Mr. Mazier to focus on the questions with regards to C30. Thank you.
So we got Health Canada right in front of us, and we've been trying to find this out for a long time. I think they're free to answer it. If they do know it, could they table that information?
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, it's outside the scope of Bill C-30, and I am not in a position to answer the question at this time.
So, okay, I'll continue on with my question then. Health Canada has confirmed that at least one of these government-funded opioid machines were used to divert drugs to the black market. Did the government shut down these opioid vending machines as soon as they found out they were made aware of the diversion?
Point of order. Same point of order. Relevance, which is in the standing orders. I know that members opposite are used to being in committee, and we normally pose relevant questions on matters related to the actual bill that's under consideration. C-30 doesn't deal with that measure, and I'm wondering, Madam Chair, whether you can ask our colleague here to bump him back in his lane. It's called lane assist.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Mazier, I would just remind you to stick to C-30, and I think the officials who are here are from the pesticides area of Health Canada, so it's probably difficult for them to answer that question.
How much time do I have left, Chair? Oh, okay. Ms. LaForce? Yeah, you're still there. The Statutory Instruments Act does not apply to Divisions 7 and 8 in Bill C-30. That means Cabinet can get around regulatory publication and parliamentary scrutiny. So, is there any binding consultation requirement that actually exists for these divisions?
Jordan Hansey with PRD. So under the bill, there is a notice required if there's two kinds of order powers. One is during following a post-market review. And in that case, there is a notice that has to be issued at least 30 days before the order. Both the notice and the order do need to be published. There aren't consultations per se. In the case of the emergency power, it also needs to be published. But that's in the context of these new order powers. Generally speaking, for PMRA, we consult on all major regulatory decisions for registrations, public consultations.
So there is or there isn't? I guess it was is there any binding consultation requirement?
For these orders, they don't include a consultation, include a notice in the case of the post-market power, and in both cases, the actual order needs to be published.
Okay, how am I doing for time? Oh, is there anything in C30 for drug diversion?
Not that I'm aware of, but again, outside of my...
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mazier. We'll continue now with Mr. Turnbull for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. I will ask relevant questions on C30. So in Division 8 of Part 3, which amends the Pest Control Products Act, I wanted to ask, I know that there's amendments made to the purposes, which now will include national economic security, regional economic security, national food security, all of which I think would change, how that act is interpreted, how decisions are made. It certainly appears that it adds in complexity to decision-making processes. Probably a good thing to consider those economic factors, but I wondered if you could speak to how this will change decision-making.
Is it on? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As a matter of day-to-day practice, again, Pesticides Regulatory Directorate is anchored in safety of health and environment, and that these changes do not change the mandate of our minister. However, they do include provisions, at least in Section 4, to ensure that as we run through our review processes, that we do include consideration of economic and food security at the national and regional level. And so how it'll change things is that our decisions will be more transparent around how we consider economic considerations in our decision-making process.
Okay, that's very helpful. And I guess for those that may be interpreting the changes that are being proposed, I see that the minister will, when a pest control product is deemed to be unacceptable for environmental risk, it still can be used to help preserve human health in cases of a crisis. And so there's emergency powers. Can you help us understand how limited and narrow the scope will be to use those powers? Because I think there's some concern that others have raised that I really think we need to make sure that we assure people that this isn't a broad set of powers, it's very narrow, focused on very extreme circumstances. Can you speak to that?
Thank you for the question. Yes, and so the emergency powers under the General Ordering Council is intended to be used only in circumstances where health is deemed acceptable, and so under no scenarios would those powers be used when under a situation where health is deemed unacceptable. But at the very first, Health Canada will undergo its usual scientific assessment, and should that assessment deem that there are unacceptable risks related to the environment, and should there be a seriously detrimental infestation that has undertaken, only then can the government decide to use these powers in order to set in a limited time frame, a very limited time frame, to continue the use of a product under those very narrow circumstances. Yes.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And what kind of a situation are we really talking about here? Seriously detrimental infestation? I can't really, nothing comes to mind for me, but, I've only worked on a farm when I was younger. I'm not a farmer, throughout generations or anything, so I don't know what we're specifically talking about. Can we talk just about an example of a seriously detrimental infestation? Do you have an example of where this would apply?
Thank you for the question. So I don't have a specific example that I could use. Again, we're hoping that these powers are used under rare and few circumstances. What I could say is, there is always a possibility where, there's a chemical that has been, a chemical that's been on the market for a very long time. It is used in practice. It's got no alternatives. There are no alternatives at all. And yet there is, the outcome of review is negative, and then, under some circumstances, you could see that these powers would be used in order to continue for a limited time. However, I can't give you a specific example, but perhaps my colleague here would like to share more.
Very briefly, please. Very briefly.
Oh, sorry.
15 seconds.
So an example could be some sort of invasive species that could threaten a major crop like wheat or something. We process many emergency registrations, we call them, each year. And in some cases, it's possible that the result of that application could be that the environmental risks are not found to be acceptable, which could be because of a lack of data.
That concludes the time. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. I'm going to thank all of our witnesses and officials. There were a number of questions that were posed that we didn't get answers to, and I'm going to ask that officials from those departments follow up and provide a timely response to the committee, and we will now suspend while we turn over for our next panel. Thank you. the meeting. I would like to welcome our witnesses. Minister, can someone maybe let Minister know that we're starting? Today we have joining us the Honourable Heath MacDonald, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, and we have the Honourable Marjorie Michel, the Minister of Health. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening statements. Minister MacDonald, we will start with you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's great to be back at Finance Committee. I sat through a few of these meetings for a period of time. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to the measures in the bill supporting Canada's world-class agriculture and food sector. However you measure it, our agriculture and food industry is a core economic driver in this country. From my home province of Prince Edward Island and right across the country, the sector drives 1 in 9 jobs, more than $100 billion of our exports, and $150 billion of our GDP. And it puts the food on the tables both here in Canada and in almost 200 countries around the world. Whether it's a farm in Saskatchewan or a food processor in Ontario, agriculture is first and foremost a business. That's why we need to take an economic lens to every decision we make to advance the sector, just as our farmers and food processors do in their businesses. And that's exactly the approach this bill is taking. I'll just briefly give you a couple of examples of agriculture in the food context. Regulatory reform. The key measure that has been welcomed by everyone in the sector is the commitment to change the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's mandate to consider food security and food costs. This change in mandate acknowledges the dual role of the agency as a rigorous protector of health and safety and enabler for trade. The CFIA does an outstanding job of building Canada's brand reputation for safe, high-quality food. That's the measure I'm hearing when I sit down with our customers in key markets around the world. But when I'm sitting down with farmers across the country, they always identify regulatory issues as one of the key barriers to our competitiveness. They are looking to us to streamline requirements, modernize outdated rules, and identify unnecessary administrative burden. There's no question. We need effective regulations to keep our food supply safe and maintain our reputation around the world for outstanding food safety and food quality. Health and safety requirements are absolutely essential for market access. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our regulations don't unnecessarily hamper our farmers' abilities to compete in the global marketplace. And that's the balance that these proposed amendments to Bill C-30 are providing. In closing, I'll just touch on a couple of other measures in the update that were very welcome news for the sectors. Up to $7 billion in new capital for agri-tech innovation in the sector committed by Farm Credit Canada and more than 20 investment organizations. The development of a national food security strategy to strengthen domestic food production and improve access to affordable, nutritious food. And $5 billion to modernize Canada's trade infrastructure to help exporters, including agri-food exporters, to diversify their trade to new markets around the world. Madam Chair, the agriculture measures in this bill are needed more urgently than ever, given the unprecedented challenges our producers are facing. High operating costs for fertilizer, fuel, and other inputs, tariffs and other trade barriers with some of our key trading partners, extreme weather conditions from droughts to flooding. Our hardworking farmers can compete with the best in the world can throw at them, but they need us as government to give them the tools to do that. The kind of tools we see in this bill and the economic update. An effective and efficient regulatory system, investments in innovation in the supply chain, and a food security strategy to help our farmers continue to feed Canada and the world. Thank you, Madam Chair. I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Minister MacDonald. Ministre Michel, vous avez 5 minutes aussi.
Minister Michel, you have 5 minutes.
Merci. Je dois appuyer? Non. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable committee members, thank you for inviting me to appear before the committee today. I'm pleased to discuss Bill C-30 with the Finance Committee, as well as healthcare in Canada.
One of Canada's fastest growing sector. It's 3.5 million jobs across the country, and about 15% of Canada's labor force in 2024. Healthcare is a real investment in our economy and in Canadians, because we cannot build Canada strong without healthy Canadians. La contribution de Santé Canada
Health Canada's contribution, as well as the contribution of the CFIA and other agencies, go beyond health. That is especially the case of agriculture. Farmers today are facing climate change, meteorological events that are extreme, as well as infestations. One of our challenges is to reduce administrative burden for farmers while ensuring the safety of our food supply chain. In rethinking the authorization process, Health Canada has become a privileged partner with farmers. Bill C-30 includes amendments that will allow the CFIA to take into account food safety and the economy in its decisions. Similar amendments are also proposed in the Pesticides Products Act. This seeks to create cultural change and operational change by requiring organizations to take into account economic security and food security without compromising health. This revision will also allow the temporary use of certain pesticides in extraordinary circumstances, notably to ensure there are no food shortages. The ultimate goal is to protect the health and safety of the food of Canadians and to ensure safe food supply that is also affordable.
We are at a turning point. We must make the right choices. We must build on our strength to lead our country with confidence in its next chapter. As we stake our claim in the global economy, our commitment to healthcare will be one of our greatest assets. By making wise investments, cutting red tape, and focusing our efforts where the opportunities are greatest, we can make a real difference. And that is exactly what we are doing. We are encouraging investment by reducing the administrative burden of doing business here. Nous collaborons avec les provinces et les territoires.
We're working with the provinces and territories, with local partners and global partners, in order to strengthen food security and make our economy more resilient. Additionally, in collaboration with provinces and territories, we're modernizing our healthcare system so that it works efficiently and can meet everyone's needs. Even though managing the cost of healthcare is always a priority, we need to see these costs as an investment that benefits all of us and all our futures. If we act now, we can ensure that the agriculture sector and the healthcare sector in Canada are sources of stability, catalyzers for prosperity and economic growth. I'm now ready to answer your questions. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Minister. I also like to thank Minister MacDonald.
Mr. Mazier. We're going to begin with Mr. Mazier.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, ministers. My questions, of course, will be for the Health Minister. We haven't seen you in the Health Committee for months, so I had to come to Finance to come and ask you. So I was wondering if you're available to testify on your government's failed $300 million prescribed IT program before summer. If you're available to come to Health Committee before the end of
Mr. Mazier, I'd remind you to stick to the C-30, please. Thank you.
She could answer, but she's choosing not to. Okay, answer. So, you mentioned in your opening statements about healthcare and the importance of healthcare, and Canadians we need a strong healthcare system. And with hundreds of thousands of people coming from around the world about to enter Canada for the FIFA World Cup, are you confident that your government's measures will ensure that Ebola will not enter and spread into Canada?
Point of order.
Mr. Turnbull?
I'm sorry to have to keep doing this, but Mr. Mazier has already been recommended to focus on Bill C-30.
She did mention it in her opening remarks.
I think I have the floor, Madam Speaker. C-30 includes a number of measures that are relevant to the Minister of Health. I would just ask that maybe the member ask some relevant questions to the legislation that we're undertaking a study of here.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull.
Point of order.
Mr. Halan?
On that point of order, I think the minister had mentioned about keeping Canadians safe and protected. And she did mention that in her opening statement as well. It's very fair that these questions be asked.
I'm just reviewing the opening statement. Well, certainly, Mr. Mazier, you can ask the question and the minister can decide if she's going to answer.
Can he repeat the question, please?
Oh, with hundreds of thousands of people coming from around the world and about to enter Canada for the FIFA World Cup, are you confident that your government's measures will ensure Ebola will not enter and spread in Canada?
Oui, je pense que oui, parce que...
Yes, because we took preventative measures. As I've already said, the risk for Canada is very low. I'm talking about, of course, Ebola entering here. And we worked with regional partners. As I've already said, Canada does not have any soccer matches with the Congo or any affected countries here in Canada, but they will have them in US or Mexico. So we took this concerted approach. I think that we took the best measures possible.
Said Canada's Ebola response is intended to align with the United States. However, the Center for Disease Control issued an order effective May 18th blocking non-U.S. citizens who had been in DRC, South Sudan, and Uganda within the past 21 days from entering the United States. Is your government considering the same?
Non-Canadians cannot enter Canada. People from those three countries, so I don't understand the difference. Can you clarify, please? Because I know that we have suspended visas from people from those countries who are not Canadian citizens or Canadian residents. So Canadian residents and Canadian citizens can always go home.
You mentioned about an alignment with the U.S. So is that your intentions?
No, je pense qu'on...
No. I think that the U.S. and Mexico and us, we have created this joint communique after having shared our measures. One of the differences, based on my understanding, is that Americans do not allow American residents to return, only American citizens, whereas in Canada, we accept our citizens and residents.
Sinon, sur le reste, je pense...
On everything else, I think we're aligned.
Minister, can you name one federal target that was actually achieved for prescribed IT?
Mr. Mazier, I'll remind you to stick to C30, please.
Point of order.
Mr. Halan.
I mean, Chair, this bill has everything to do with finances, and it's an update, so-called. So, I mean, it should be very fair in the latitude that ministers usually have and the latitude we should have for questions. I think it's very relevant.
Thank you. Did you have a following point of order, Mr. Mazier?
In her opening remarks, she talked about modernizing healthcare, and of course, that's full on prescribed IT. That was what it was supposed to do, actually. So,
okay, carry on, Mr. Mazier.
Thank you. So, I wonder, did you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, you can repeat, please.
Okay. Can you name one federal target that was actually achieved by prescribed IT?
Ben, écoutez, moi, je vais vous dire que sur le AI Scribe,
there is AI Scribe. Those results were great. You need to make sure to not get things mixed up. I know that you're always going back on InfoWay. Of course, there are issues with InfoWay's governance. As a government, it's true that it's an independent agency, but we have board members. So I did what needs to be done to talk to my representative on the board, and measures were taken. What you need to realize is that this company also did excellent things, such as AI Scribe, that have over 10,000 pickups across the country. And I also have to say that Quebec signed a contract with InfoWay for data transfers. So that's that.
Yes, I'll ask the following question. Can you come and testify before the Health Committee, before the end of summer, to clarify all these questions that we have about Prescribe IT?
Je ne vais pas me commettre.
I will not commit.
Oh, so I might as well keep on asking here. Minister, the Canada Health InfoWay Board voted to terminate Prescribe IT in November of 2025. Your department spent another $10.2 million on the program. Why did Canadians pay $10 million to keep a funding program that was terminated?
Parce que vous savez très bien, Monsieur Bézier.
You know very well, Mr. Mazier. You don't just shut down a program overnight. There are a series of things related to data transfer. We're talking about data. That's what this program was doing. Before closing the program, we need to recuperate a lot of data, and that's why we spend that money.
Senior Assistant Deputy Minister is a federally appointed member of the Canada Health InfoWay Board. Was there ever a time when she voted against giving Michael Green a performance award during his time managing Prescribe IT?
A very brief response, please.
Yes or no?
Thank you, Mr. Mazier. That concludes your time. We'll now continue with Ms. Tesser-Dirksen, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the committee for giving me the indulgence of asking a question as a guest here today. Minister Michel, you mentioned in your opening comments about the importance of making wise investments and finding efficiencies and reducing administrative costs. So I'm going to ask a question that actually literally affects directly every single person in this country, and in fact, every person on the planet who has ever lived or ever will live. We are all going to die. Some of my colleagues would know that I worked as a funeral director. I'm also a board director of a nonprofit foundation working to build a palliative care hospice in my riding of Milton East, Halton Hills South. So in the spirit of wise investments, I'll refer back to a study, 2012, that the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association published on cost effectiveness of palliative care. And it found that in the current environment of rising healthcare costs and concerns about the sustainability of publicly funded healthcare, policymakers were paying more attention to the high cost associated with the last year of life. And Hospice Palliative Care Ontario, in my home province, offered that a hospice bed cost about 1/3 of the cost of a hospital bed for a dying person. So specific funding and investment was also found by HPCO to reduce or possibly reduce system savings by $200 million a year and up to $2 billion over 10 years in Ontario alone, so not insignificant. Now, I understand that health infrastructure funding is dealt with through housing and infrastructure and that health is delivered by the provinces, but we do have a national framework on palliative care in this country. So, as Minister of Health, can you comment on how Health Canada sees palliative care's role in providing quality, cost-effective health care to dying Canadians?
Merci pour la question, mais spécifiquement.
Thank you. In the way you formulated the question, it's more a provincial jurisdiction. Yes, there is a strategy. Yes, we have signed agreements with provinces. I'm currently negotiating with all provinces, including Ontario, on the Working Together agreement. Before, there was a specific agreement on palliative care that's no longer here. So now I'm trying to negotiate with every province so that, based on their priorities, they can choose where to spend the money on. These are services provided by the provinces within federal envelopes. On top of healthcare transfers, we have the Working Together agreement that we're renewing for over 7 years. Usually it's for 3 years, but I decided to go with 7 to ensure more predictability for provinces so they can plan changes in their healthcare system.
Thank you. How's my time, Madam Chair? Great. I have 4 minutes left.
Well,
Okay.
in the total, yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'll take two quick minutes to ask. Thank you for your answer. To ask Minister MacDonald a question. So my legislative assistant used to work in the Ministry of Agriculture, and he comes from a farming family. So we talk regularly about agriculture, and we actually recently discussed the interest-free limit under the Advance Payments Program that had been increased to $250,000 in 2026 to all non-canola advances, and that was increased from a limit of $100,000 previously. So, Minister, could you update us on how that's impacting producers and why it's important that our government committed to this increase?
Look, I think anything we can do for producers right now and to meet the moment that they're being faced with, whether it be climate change or trade or non-trade barriers, I think is extremely important. And the advancement of the, industry has been asking for this for a long time to increase the advance payment program, and we felt that this was an opportunity to help them. So we raised it to $250,000, and canola farmers, obviously, with what they've gone through over the past few months relative to some of the trade barriers in some countries, was raised to $350,000, and we'll continue to look at that.
Thanks so much. I'll pass it back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. My colleague has kindly offered to share her time with me. I have j'ai des questions pour.
I have two questions for the Minister on C30.
To the Pest Control Products Act. The amendments in C30 refer to a situation where the Governor and Council Cabinet can overturn the decision of the Health Minister. I'm going to ask both questions together and then allow you some time to answer. I'm just wondering if you could share a scenario in which the Health Minister would deny a pesticide use and the government would choose to overturn it, and at what point that would be made public. And then the second one is just with regard to the changes to the CFIA's mandate. And again, to understand, what does it mean when the CFIA will be taking economic security and food security into account while not compromising on their mandate for human, animal, and plant health?
OK. Donc, pour les deux questions, la première chose que je vais dire, c'est que moi, je suis la ministre.
So first, I want to say that I'm the Minister of Health. For me, health is a no-go. What I mean is that everything that's scientifically proved that has a negative impact on health means that I will say no on that. I want to make that very clear. Well, there are products that can be put to the market and that can be removed because we see that it may be bad for the environment, but it may be bad for animals, not on human health. So you only have 10 seconds. And then I can say there's no risk for human health, so I approve. But if I say that there is a risk for human health and I say no, maybe there are other considerations. Thank you, Madam Minister. Now, Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister MacDonald, thank you for being here to answer our questions. How much money does the government plan to save by closing down the Agri-Food Department's research centers?
For a 3-year period per year.
Et auquel on pourra ajouter les.
And on top of that, you can add $97 million for buildings, so barely $171 million over 5 years. Is it worth it?
Parce que c'est un montant qui.
Because that's a ridiculous amount at the federal level.
I think it is worth it. I think what we're learning as we advance through this process is that a revitalization of science in this country is certainly prevalent with any industry and stakeholders that I've been meeting with across the country.
La semaine dernière, le comité a.
Last week, the committee welcomed Mr. Ross from the Union of Agricultural Producers and said that the closure of AFC's research centers weakens the industry's ability to develop concrete solutions to fight climate change, improving their practices and ensuring the competitiveness of Canadian farms. Do you share the concerns of that witness when it comes to how competitive our farmers are?
Oh, I think we need to act more quickly and be precise in our decisions relevant to science and research in this country. It's more on the operational sides that we're seeing changes in. The science is going to get done one way or another, and we'll keep growing on that.
Le comité permanent de
The Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Foods, which I'm part of, just published a report on the shutting down of research centers. I believe that you read them and essentially asked the government to walk back that decision and to publish cost-benefit analysis and to examine other ways to reduce spending and to preserve current research projects and to present a research plan to ensure the survival of agricultural research. Now, this committee that's mostly made out of members of your party is going back to do his homework. Do you know that about that report, and do you have anything to tell the committee about it?
I think, like I said, the more industry and stakeholders you talk to, excuse me, across the country, you're starting to see a shift to say we need research that is being done for industry, very specifically. And just last week or 2 weeks ago in Saskatchewan, I heard it right from the scientists themselves at the University of Saskatchewan, along with stakeholders sitting at the table. And to be very blunt about it, they were aligned with what we're trying to do and our vision for research in this country. There's still going to be 17 establishments across the country. There's changes. Obviously, those changes are hard. They're not easy to do, but we're going to continue to do the research.
Je veux pas vous contredire, mais c'est pas les.
I don't want to contradict you, but that's not what I'm hearing. In fact, around 97% of witnesses, and I think the only witness who supported these cuts were yourself. Besides you, everybody have been saying that the ecosystem is being broken, and that has a clear impact on the health of Canadians, on the productivity of our farmlands. It created a lot of concerns. If you think about communities in places like Lacombe, as well as for industry players who need that data, we will lose data accumulated over decades. And for you, turning your back to science in that way, that change of direction is justified because you're saving $27 million over 5 years? Over 3 years. When the deficit is $72 billion, $27 million, 72 billion, by making cuts in research and agriculture, you think that's justified?
Basically, look, the research is going to get done. I'll continue to say that, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. I will assure that. I am not going to have a legacy on my behalf sitting here saying that I cut research. Research is too important, and when it's trade around the world, so we're going to continue to do research. There's 355 scientists across the country. There will be likely 25 less. Some of those will retire and so on and so forth, but the research is going to be done, and it may be done in co-injunction with the academias and the provincial governments. That's what the discussion we're into now, to maintain some of these facilities. They may look a little different. The research may look a little different, but certainly we're working with all provinces that are affected by this.
Et j'imagine vous comptez.
And I believe that you will work with universities and other educational institutions, as well as environmental protection centers in Quebec. I'm also concerned about your relationship with researchers. We hear that some researchers were being told to stop all research. They will be given 1 year of salary, or they will work and continue their research. Of course, scientists will want to complete their research, but that means that they will no longer be compensated in a year after having served their country, will be left with nothing. Is that what you're offering to your scientists who want to improve agricultural practices across the country, regardless of the kind of soil or the conditions, etc., etc.?
And it'll be a shared value, and if research has to move from one facility to another, then that's the process that we'll take.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm going to go in a different direction than I wasn't expecting to because of the questions from my colleague and your responses, Mr. Minister. And you said the science is going to get done and you don't want your legacy to be cuts to science and research. Well, I've got bad news for you. That's already your legacy, shutting down 7 research centers and experimental farms. 600 plus scientists and researchers and specialists are losing their jobs. So that is just a fact. And you were saying the research is going to get done by the private sector universities, but your own quote in the House of Commons was investment in research is down 15% on the public side. Private sector is down, and universities is down 77%, and enterprises conducting research and development has shrunk by 30%. Every single witness we had from the provinces, municipalities, and the universities said they do not have the resources to carry on this research. So I think it's very clear that this research is not going to continue on. This is intergenerational libraries of knowledge that are going to be lost. So how do you possibly say that this isn't your legacy? Because it very clearly right now it is.
Knowledge transfer was something that you mentioned, and that has decreased over the past 20 years extremely, very, very expeditiously. So I think you're actually answering part of your own question. I think research has to change in this country, and the more we delve into this, sitting alongside researchers and sitting alongside stakeholders from your province as well, feel that there's an opportunity here to do research different, to do research more precisely for the industry and stakeholders. The times have changed, and we need to move and meet the moment, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, I don't think doing research differently is closing critical research centers. When you have your prison farm that's now $40 million plus, well over budget, I don't think that is a good use of taxpayer dollars, when those dollars could have kept the Lacombe Research Centre open for another 3 years, Quebec open for another 3.5 years, and Napan Experimental Farm open for another 20 years. I think that's where dollars would be much better spent. Minister, you mentioned in your opening remarks about the importance of trade. Have you done an economic analysis or an impact analysis on signing the Mercosur trade agreement will have on Canada's livestock industry? Obviously, these proponents are very concerned about the impact that this will have. Have you personally told the Prime Minister to exempt agriculture from the Mercosur trade agreement because of the concerns raised by Canada's cattle, beef, pork, and poultry producers?
Look, there's been many discussions on Mercosur, and certainly I've had discussions with Manny Sadu, the minister responsible. Just recently had discussions with negotiators.
Have you spoken to the Prime Minister, though? Have you told him the concerns personally that this will have a detrimental impact on Canadian livestock producers?
We've spoken relative to Manny Sadu, as I told you. We've spoken to the...
Okay, I'll say that's a no. Has CFIA or your department or AFC done? We haven't inspected the partners in Brazil and Argentina since 2018 in terms of their animal health and disease traceability protocols. Have you done an analysis of what the impact would be of BSE, African swine fever, or foot and mouth disease coming into Canada as a result of this trade agreement?
I believe, Honourable Member, there has been inspections done, maybe not in certain areas, but there has been inspections done in that country.
Lastly, and I guess you were talking about the importance of making decisions on an economic lens. We now know that the Alto high-speed rail will impact and possibly end 5,500 farms. Has an economic impact analysis on food security or food affordability or food sovereignty been done when a high-speed rail is going to potentially be a loss of 5,500 farms in Eastern Canada and Central Canada?
Well, that's the first time I heard that there'd be a loss of 5,500 farms.
Well, you're cutting them in half, so that's likely going to be ending those farms.
No, I think there's negotiations right now to ensure that farmers can get from one side of their field to the other, depending on where the rail goes. There's been lots of collaboration and cooperation with UCP, with Martin Caron, with my office as well, to be ensured that we're updated on a very frequent basis. There's also been very many conversations and many concerns from our own caucus relevant to the high-speed rail, and we'll continue to push the issue to ensure that farming continues in those areas.
Well, I'm glad that other Liberal members are having concerns about the Alto Rail, and I hope that this is a wake-up that you abandon this boondoggle before it happens. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. We'll continue now with MP McDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister McDonald, I'm going to be asking you some questions on Bill C-30. We know that over the past several years, CFIA has been modernizing its regulatory processes, and all in support of Canada's agriculture and agri-food sector. So about a year ago, I attended my first Ag Committee meeting, and we heard from stakeholders at that meeting about the necessity to speed up the process of permitting, the necessity to speed up the process of crop protectant approval, just to keep up with technology. So a lot of discussion was around drones at that first meeting I was at, and we've know that drones are getting used more and more throughout the world. Even our military is looking at drone use to monitor the Arctic. But what question for you, Minister, is can you give us a report on the work that has been done to digitize export certificates, how they've been speeded up, and the delivery of services been modernized to allow our exporters faster track to markets?
I think the important aspect of that, too, it goes back to ensuring that we're competitive with our trading partners. So, and I know the health minister has been a great benefit in her role to agriculture and agri-food, and I certainly appreciate it, and I know many of our stakeholders do. But, you know, as part of Budget 2025, we invested about $150 million to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. You know, we wanted to progress digitization and export certificates, and we wanted to regulatory alignment to other countries, which is what we're continuing to work on. Ever since I started or been around this place, I've often heard many stories about producers, you know, containers being stuck off of ports because of a misspelling of a word or something to that level. So it was extremely important. Innovation technology is going to play a significant role in agriculture going forward, and we need to make decisions quicker than we have in the past, and I think we're catching up a little bit, but we still have a long way to go, and drones is certainly going to play a part of that. It's not just about spraying, it's about planting seeds as well with drones. So there's lots of opportunities there. We just have to make sure that we get the trusted information and get it to in farmers' hands and enable them to be competitive, especially when you see that other countries that we're trading with or other countries that we're importing food from, for example, are utilizing this technology. And Canada just we need to step up, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
So, Minister, we also know in Bill C-30 there's amendments proposed that are going to allow for the lens to look at CFIA's actions under food security, economic security, and trade facilitation. And of course, all these considerations will be included with maintaining Canada's strong health and safety protocols that have allowed us to market throughout the world. You and I both return to a province that exports about 90% of what we produce. You hear from producers and exporters all the time. Can you just elaborate on how these mandate changes are going to help farmers, processors in Atlantic Canada and throughout Canada?
Well, I think, you know, I touched on it in my first answer to you, is when you have country to the south of us, we have to align ourselves in better position with their regulatory body like APHIS or Senacica in Mexico, and ensure that we're on a competitive level playing field. And certainly these changes will expedite decisions all the while, and it's important to continue to say that, is keeping Canadians safe. Canada is known around the world for food safety and a trusted trading partner, and I think it's time that we leveraged both of those. So regulatory decision making is certainly something that we need to take a firm stance on and ensure that first and foremost we're making sure Canadians are safe, but secondly that we put an economic lens on some of our decisions to ensure that we're being competitive with our trading partners. We're in a situation that has grown rapidly on the geopolitical front, and we need to ensure that we're doing everything possible to make our farmers sustainable and prosperous.
And Minister, just one more quick question.
You have 10 seconds.
Well, it's World Milk Day. Would you agree that supply management is perhaps the best food sovereignty program Canada could ever instill and maintain?
Yes, Mr. Dairy Farmer.
Yes or no
yes.
answer?
Thank you very much, Mr. and Minister McDonald. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm really happy with what I just heard. On something else, Ms. Michel, I want to hear about the mandate of the CFIA. Before, they only looked at public health, but now it also needs to promote economic health. Is that your recommendation, or is that a recommendation from finance? I'm a member of the government, so it's also mine. It's a concerted approach. Look, you're seeing what's happening around the world. Canada needs to act in a more agile manner and quicker. And because of how close we are with the USA when it comes to trade, of course, now the situation is different. So we must completely relook at how Canada will become self-sufficient and develop its own market. So that's your narrative. When we ask questions, you're saying that these are things coming from stakeholders, so broader than just cabinet. So who are these stakeholders? Are you ready to provide a list of consulted stakeholders to this committee, as well as what they recommended when it comes to the change of the CFIA's mandate? No. It's something we thought about ourselves. Of course, many sectors support our decision. But it's not because that some sector asked us for something that we are taking that direction. We are looking at how we are doing things due to the current situation. Is there a link with your participation at the Spring Dialogue hosted by PropLife Canada last spring? They're essentially asking for those revisions to bring in more intrusive elements into agri-foods. So when I became the Minister of Health, because the CFIA and the PMRA are under my jurisdiction, I asked my team to engage the agriculture sector. That was a surprise because apparently that's not something that is not done. But I prefer keeping those two entities under the Department of Health because I think it's the best way to protect people's health. Mr. McDonald knows. Thank you, Minister. That is your time. You only had 2.5 minutes.
Barlow for 5 minutes? No, Mr. Mazier? Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Minister of Health. Your department spent $300 million on prescribed IT. Less than 5% of the prescriptions ever flowed through that program. Was that money well spent for taxpayers? Yes or no? Was it well spent for taxpayers? Yes or no?
Je dirais que je l'ai déjà.
I've already said this, and I will repeat. This was a project that was launched with provinces. The provinces asked to work with the federal government to implement this program.
Yes or no answers. So, yes or no? Was it good use of taxpayer dollars?
Je pense que, comme dans beaucoup de choses, ce sont des.
I think that, like many other things, this is a pilot project that was initiated and did not lead to the expected results. And that's why we decided to stop funding it.
Canada Health InfoWay was paid nearly $900,000 in compensation last year. $900,000. Given his salary is funded by tax dollars, do you believe that that was an appropriate amount? Yes or no?
Ça, c'est une question à poser au conseil d'administration.
That's something you need to ask the company's board, not me.
To provide any restrictions on compensation for executives at Canada Health InfoWay in the future contribution agreements?
Nous avons demandé au conseil.
We asked the board of directors to take another look at how the institution is governed and to come with recommendations. Currently, there's an acting president.
So there is no plan to offer restrictions?
Je vous l'ai dit déjà, c'est le.
I already said that it is up to the board.
Revisit this question because I didn't hear it at the very end there. Your senior deputy minister is a federally appointed member on the Canada Health Infoway board. And was there ever a time that she voted against giving Michael Green a performance award during his time managing Prescribe IT? I didn't hear your response.
Je vous avais dit que je ne sais pas parce que je ne participe.
I told you that I do not know because I do not participate in those meetings. The board is an independent council, so those reports are not provided to me.
So you don't know if your own official was actually providing bonuses to the person that was responsible
Je
for
crois
the
que ce sont des
Prescribe IT
décisions qui sont
program?
prises par des conseils d'administration.
I think those are decisions made by the board, and I do not interfere with the board of an independent entity.
I guess, Minister, you're spending lots of money, and there's lots of health issues, as we can tell. And I can't understand why you can't spend some time and make sure that you come to the Health Committee to explain all these questions that we have. So can you commit today, before the summer break, that you'll come to the Health Committee and explain all this?
Je vous ai déjà dit, Monsieur Mézier, que je ne vais pas me commettre.
I've already told you I will not commit.
Okay.
C'est pas comme quoi je ne suis jamais venu au comité.
I already appeared at the Health Committee 5 times. So I cannot say today I will commit to go before the end of this parliamentary session.
Je peux me commettre parce que je ne peux pas me commettre aujourd'hui.
I cannot commit today, that's all. I've always appeared at committee, but today I cannot commit that I will go before the end of the month.
Agreement between Canada Blood Services and Grifols?
Non, je n'ai pas. J'ai lu le rapport, oui.
I read the report.
Écoutez, l'accord avec Grifols.
Of course, first, there were issues. 2 people died recently in Manitoba. And that's very sad. But there was not a direct link drawn between Grifol. It's still under investigation. We are looking at the situation closely. We're working with provinces. You also need to understand that the contract with Grifol is also one that we have with the provinces. It's not solely between them and the federal government.
Agreement that concerned you?
No.
No?
No.
Is there anything in the agreement that allows Canadian donated plasma?
Sorry, Mr. Point of order?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to bring this back to relevance to C30. I think once again we've gone far off topic here.
Thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. I'm going to allow the question. Thank you. But you have about 5 seconds remaining in your time.
And is there anything in the agreement that allows Canadian donated plasma to be used in products sold offshore?
A very brief response.
What was the answer?
Okay, thank you. That concludes the time that we have for that
We didn't hear
round.
the answer, Chair. What was the answer?
We'll go back to you. I'm sure we can watch the tape. Thank you, Mr. Mazier. We will now go to Mr. Sawatsky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister MacDonald. It's nice to see you again after your visit to BC. So many residents in my riding of New Westminster, Burnaby, Millardville will benefit from the Canada Groceries and Essentials benefit on June 5th, where a single person could receive up to $950 in support to help address rising costs and affordability pressures, which we are hearing about. We also know that ensuring long-term food security requires a strong and reliable food system. Our government has invested $500 million through the Strategic Response Fund and is establishing a new food security fund to strengthen domestic food production, improve food distribution networks, and enhance food security across Canada. So could you elaborate on how these investments will strengthen Canada's agricultural food sector and food supply chains?
Well, I think, we're seeing an opportunity for investment across the country relevant to being more domestic, especially in our processing side, the agri-food side, the value-add chain. And I think there's been part of a funding resource that's been missing for small to medium enterprises that we're trying to create a route for them to be able to scale up. And when that happens, obviously, that the other stuff that comes with it is creating an atmosphere for growth, is creating infrastructure, making sure the infrastructure is in place to meet the needs for that growth. And that's why you're seeing some of the Canada Build Strong projects, like the Port of Montreal, for example. I toured the port with you in Vancouver, Roberts Banks. So these are the types of things, and it's going to be an ecosystem of growth, but I think the opportunities are certainly available and right in front of us, and I think supporting those processors and farmers is certainly going to allow us to have that growth and that potential to become more domesticated in this country. And I think we're seeing some excitement and relevant to that, and we'll continue to pursue some of that, those projects.
Thank you. And you mentioned the Port of Vancouver. It was a very informative tour. And looking forward with expanding, building new relationships, how will these increase Canada's food sector and supply chain? What might be some things we can expect coming down the line there?
Well, I think, we can process more of the food that is grown here right at home. That's one thing, is a lot of our processing leaves this country to be processed in another country, and I think that could be significant here, but not just on the food sovereignty side, but also the economic side. You're creating jobs. You're becoming more dependent as a country. I think it's extremely important. So it's a supply chain that we need to work on, and I think if there's any silver lining in everything that we're going through, it's allowing government and policymakers to be more bold, and it's allowing businesses to see that the potential that they have in this country, maybe to grow from a small enterprise, is there, but they do need financial assistance and they need some capital. That's where I think governments have to come into play, is to ensure that they're providing resources for that initial capital funding. You and I visited the plant-based project in BC, and you see the potential that's there, you see the excitement, and they just need a little bit of help to continue to grow. And I think the funding that we're trying to put in place for that is for those smaller types of operations that will benefit Canada as a whole, communities, rural Canada. So it's a point well received to the government, and I think we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Madam Chair, how long do I have? 30 seconds. What tangible benefits can Canadians expect to see from these investments in terms of food security and affordability?
Well, I think even if you look at the Local Food Infrastructure Fund, I think it was over $100 million, about 1,400 projects that are approved for it. I mean, those types of funding projects allow people to have cold storage or freezers on site that maybe they couldn't afford, prior to having any access to some of the resources that the governments are providing. And when that happens, then they can sell their products more closer to home. They can keep them in storage longer. Retailers are more happy. We can cut out some of the transportation costs and the middlemen possibly. So these hubs.
Thank you, Minister MacDonald. Sorry, we're going to have to end it there. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank Ministers MacDonald and Minister Michel for your time today, and we're going to now briefly suspend while we turn over before we receive Minister Hajdu. Thank you very much. Our meeting. Welcome back. I would like to welcome Minister Hajdu. Minister Hajdu, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. I note that she is joined by Deputy Minister Paul Thompson and Associate Deputy Minister and Chief Operating Officer for Service Canada, Cliff Groen from the Department of Employment and Social Development. Welcome and go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the invitation to appear in front of your committee. It's a pleasure to be with you here today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I'm here with Deputy, you've just mentioned, Madam Chair, 2 deputies, very esteemed deputies. And I'm here really to talk about what a pivotal moment this is for Canada and for Canadian workers in particular. As we've noted and many people have commented, Canadians are working very hard and they're feeling the pressure as the labour market changes. But despite those uncertainties, Canadians have rolled up their sleeves to defend Canada, their communities, and each other. The government is laser focused on strengthening Canada's economic and social security networks and providing all Canadians a fair chance to succeed at every stage of life. And a fair chance relies on getting the skills needed for great paying jobs in demand right now. Nous devons regarder la réalité en face.
We need to look at the reality in front of us. Canada needs to deal with a huge shortage of qualified workers.
Clear plan to meet the moment. By strengthening today's workforce, by preparing Canadians for the jobs of tomorrow, and by delivering the major projects that will shape our future and build Canada strong. We're building more homes, we're modernizing infrastructure, and we're strengthening national defense, but all of that work depends on skilled people. La prospérité du Canada dépend.
The prosperity of Canada depends on the next generation of skilled trade workers.
That we have the people to build up our economy, our communities, and that long-term prosperity. So the Spring Economic Update announced a $6 billion nationwide effort to recruit, train, and hire 100,000 new Red Seal workers over the next 5 years. It's focused on 3 strategic pillars. First, recruitment. We need to help provinces and territories with their work to ensure young Canadians and those considering a career change see the value of a career in the skilled trades. Good wages, stable employment, often pensions, and the opportunity to contribute to nation-building projects like nuclear plants, stadiums, and even Parliament here today. That's why we're investing $2 billion through the Team Canada Strong program that will support young Canadians to learn about and enter the skilled trades through experienced employer connections and targeted supports. Second, our apprenticeship system is built on earning while you learn, and it needs to keep pace with modern industry needs. And that's why we'll work with provinces and territories to modernize the Red Seal program and expand the Union Training and Innovation program that will support certifications in Red Seal trades. This will be supported by $331 million in funding over 5 years, starting in 26-27. And it's about the reduction of barriers that apprentices often face in training, in hours accumulation, and in testing. We're also investing in the financial supports that keep apprentices in their training by making sure that we can help them manage with the cost of lost earnings during training or in between opportunities. And that's how we'll do that is by providing a $400 weekly income top-up while they attend in-class training in addition to the EI they're entitled to. This is a total of $16,000 in potential income top-ups, and this is again about reducing financial pressures that stand in the way of completion. And we will ensure a $5,000 completion bonus for those apprentices who achieve Red Seal certification. Finally, too often those that are ready to begin their apprenticeship face challenges with that first apprenticeship job placement that includes an employer that has a Red Seal journey person that can help them use those hours towards their certification. So we're going to help cover up to $10,000 of an apprentice's first-year salary, which will reduce hiring costs for these employers and encourage employers to invest in the talent that they themselves say they need, the next generation of skilled workers. Les mesures proposées nous...
The proposed measures will help us mobilize youth. At the end of the day, the most important thing is affordability. We will make education more affordable.
That we've done, Madam Chair, by making sure that post-secondary education continues to be accessible. We've expanded or extended the temporary 40% increase to Canada student grants and the temporary increase to the weekly Canada student loan limit of $300 for the 26-27 academic year. This will support about 571,000 students through increased grants and 422,000 through higher
Minister,
loan
could you
limits.
wrap up in the next 10 seconds,
And I will
please?
wrap up, Madam Speaker. The Spring Economic Update also continues the work we've been pursuing on EI modernization by ensuring additional weeks of EI
Thank you, Minister.
in
That
13 regions that struggle
concludes
with
your time. Thank you very much. We will
seasonal
now
employment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. We will now begin with 6 minutes from Mr. Genis, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you again, Minister. I want to talk to you a bit about the skilled trades programming. You've highlighted the reintroduction of apprenticeship grants. Here's the timeline. Apprenticeship grants were introduced for the first time in 2006 by the Harper government's first budget. That was 20 years ago. Apprenticeship completion grants were introduced in 2009. Now, all of these grants were canceled by Liberals, with the last batch canceled in 2025 by the Carney government. There's been a lot of fanfare around the reintroduction of these grants, and I want to be very clear that we're glad they're back, but there hasn't been a lot of acknowledgement of the fact that you first canceled them before reintroducing them, and in fact there wasn't the same level of announcement at the time when they were canceled. I wonder if you agree with or if you dispute the timeline that I've laid out.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, and I'm glad to hear your interest in supporting the skilled trades. In fact, this is one of the elements that people like the Canadian Building Trades Union and other skilled trades unions have called for the reintroduction of. The last grant period expired, and the new grant period will be retroactive to make sure that no one goes without their completion grant.
Yeah. And Minister, we're glad that it's retroactive. Of course, as you mentioned, building trades, various union organizations, as well as Conservatives, were opposed to the cancellation of these grants, and we're advocating for them to be brought back. I just wonder if you can explain why the government canceled them initially.
So the completion grant wasn't canceled. That funding expired. We are renewing that funding and, in fact, increasing the grants as per the request of building trades professionals. The other piece that I think is very important and I think comes directly from feedback from building trades professionals is that completion grants, the interim completion grants, were not as helpful, quite frankly, to apprentices as things like the $400 top-up will be during training periods or supports during periods where they're not able to accumulate hours. And in fact, what building
Minister,
trades...
if I can just jump in, thank you. I mean, the original proposal 20 years ago, not proposal, the original policy 20 years ago that was implemented by a Conservative government was to have grants throughout the process of earning your apprenticeship, as well as completion grants, which were added in 2009. You have previously criticized the completion grants. Actually, on February 5th, you were before the Human Resources Committee, in which you were asked by my colleague Colin Reynolds about the decision to cancel the grants. You said at the time it's not driving completion in the way that it was designed. Again, I'm glad the grants are back. It's just that there was no announcement when you canceled them, and you're communicating on this as if this was something entirely new instead of a decision you made and defended to cancel grants and then have now decided to reinstate them.
Well, actually, we're communicating this in alignment with the advice and feedback that we've received from building trades professionals, including unions, who have said that the way that the grant and the contributions, completion contributions are designed are critically important to helping people through the red skills trades. And indeed, I did say that. I said that there was a relatively low take-up of completion grants, and this redesign is really focused on what building trades professionals and trainers have told us will be most useful to helping people through the pipeline of training.
Yeah.
So listen, we want to make sure that what we're
Minister,
doing works, and that's how we've designed it in partnership with stakeholders.
But I do think in the future it would be better for people that are pursuing these careers to not have the abruptness of saying, well, this is. I mean, if you want to change the program, I think there's logic to that. But saying, but having it end and then announcing it as if it's something new, I think causes confusion and disruption for people that are trying to plan. I want to also ask, in terms of trades workers, I'm very concerned about the jobs numbers as it relates to the areas in which trades workers are working. We need more trades workers, and we also need opportunities, places for apprentices to work. You talked about apprentices struggling to find jobs. I just draw your attention to the fact in the latest jobs numbers in 1 month, we lost 16,000 jobs in construction alone. Generally, we're seeing very heavy job losses in goods-producing sectors and natural resources. Despite promises and announcements from government, we're shedding jobs in these key areas. On this side of the table, we want to see more training opportunities, and we also want to see more work for apprentices. What's your reaction to the significant losses in jobs, for instance, in construction that we're seeing?
What I would say is that, in fact, what we're hearing largely, especially from major projects proponents, from the Canadian Builders Association, from a number of employers across the country who are getting big projects lifted off the ground, is that one limiting factor will be skilled trades workers. And in fact, what we have done is worked very closely with not only unions and labor groups, but employer groups, including major projects, to understand what that pattern of employment looks like. This is clear. We have a shortage of skilled tradespeople across this country. This has been noted a number of times, including by members from your party. Yeah. And this particular approach is about ensuring that small and
Minister, if I
medium-sized
could just
businesses
clarify in the brief
often-
time I have left, I'm not disagreeing with you that we need more trades workers. We also need more trades work, because apprentices need opportunities and places to use their skills so that they're ready to fill the workforce gaps that we are going to see, especially as many older trades workers retire. What's your response to the fact that we lost 16,000 construction jobs in the last month, and what are the challenges we're going to see for apprentices finding opportunities in light of how, under your watch, youth unemployment 14.3%, high levels of unemployment, especially in these goods-producing sectors?
That concludes your time. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Lavoie.
We will now continue with Mr. Lavoie, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for being here, Ms. Minister, as well as Mr. Groh and Mr. Thompson. I'm happy to have you here. I want to talk about businesses, AI, and the changing nature of a lot of jobs. In a past life, I saw AI adopted by businesses. We see that there's a gap of adoption in SMEs. SMEs that use AI use it more and more, but some aren't, so there's this gap. Some jobs may disappear and others will be created. So, according to you, what sectors will see changes, or what new professions need to be created, because this will create new jobs? We know that when computers arrived, some jobs ended and other jobs were invented. So talk to me about that. And before you answer, I have another question. For the average Joe or Jane, what is the Red Seal? I've brought up the Red Seal, but I'm not sure that everyone knows what Red Seal trades are. Thank you for your question. Maybe I will answer the second question first. So the Red Seal designation is for professions it's for 54 professions in the construction sector, as well as for technicians, for example, car mechanics or airplane mechanics, and other transportation methods.
There are a number of red seals that are very specific in terms of technical trades. These are all occupations that are agreed upon by provinces and territories, and they do allow for the designate to have better labor mobility across provincial territories, as those red seals are recognized by each other's provinces as being proficient. So, for example, if you're a heavy equipment operator or a crane operator in Ontario and you have your red seal designation, you can work in Quebec, you can work in Alberta, you can work in Manitoba, and your designation is declared to be that you are a professional in that area. They are complex positions. They often take sometimes between 3 to 5 years to complete. It's a combination of in-class study as well as hours that you achieve on the work site with a designated journey person to supervise and teach you increasingly complex skills. So that's what a Red Seal professional is. And thank you for the question. Many people don't know that, and it's an important question. You can see all of the designated Red Seals online at the Government of Canada website. In reference to your first question, it's difficult to project which jobs are going to be fully displaced and which jobs are going to be changed. There are a bunch of different conjectures out there in terms of what is happening. Regardless, I think what we're seeing is that every job is having some introduction of the use of artificial intelligence, of technological skills, even in the Red Seals. So I'll give you an example. In the days gone by, a crane operator would have to manually calculate his load and then manually figure out how to lift that load using complex skills way beyond my ability. Now, many of the equipment that construction workers might use as heavy equipment operators have an element of automation, an element of computation that's happening on a computer within that particular machinery. Does that mean that that individual is not needed? No, it does not. But it does mean that the job is changing and the skills that person is training for is changing. And I think we're seeing that across a number of different sectors. The last thing I'll say is that's why our programs, especially around skilled work placements for young people, where their course of study is matched with a paid work experience, is so valuable, because employers say, well, it gives us an opportunity to train on at the moment what we're needing, which is often way ahead of what the curriculum says. And in fact, young people will say they sometimes go back to the classroom and say, well, that's not quite how it's happening in real life. So it also provides a good feedback loop for trainers as well. Merci pour la question.
Merci. Puis dites-moi, dans la...
Thank you. At the beginning, you talked about 100,000 new workers, a lot of new professions. I have 2 children, a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old. They are trying to figure out what they want to do. How can you ensure that all these jobs, all the support, all the money will reach them? I'm thinking about young people, but it can also be people who are looking for a career change. We need to work with provinces and territories and employers and unions and the institutions that develop the workforce, that include people like your children. My youngest son.
To trades in a partnership with the high school and the local community
Apologies,
college.
Minister, that concludes the time. Merci,
Mais
Monsieur
félicitations
Roy.
pour... merci d'avoir répondu en français.
Thank you for answering in French. I appreciate that. I'm trying my best. We will now continue with Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes. Hello, Madam Haidu. Thank you for being here. In the economic update, if you go to Chapter 2, page 124, there is a part that talks about improving services to Canadians. ESDC will receive funding to support OAS payments and to modernize it, and to ensure that seniors can receive the exact amount at the right moment. And there's also funding for the CRA so that it conserves the amount of staff necessary in their call centers, and that will make it easier for Canadians to communicate this with the CRA on things related to benefits and taxes. This is a question I asked at question period several times. Should this amount add to the $6.6 billion already allocated?
This is a separate amount that helps with the modernization of the function of these benefits, but ultimately the process of modernization is under budget and is moving along according to plan.
Vous nous dites que le montant avant...
You said that things are moving ahead well, but You're also asking for more funds. I participated in the technical briefing a few weeks ago. How many cases are in the backlog pipeline and that were not resolved by your department yet?
Of the 7.7 million Canadians that are receiving benefits, we still have 48,000 new applicants that are waiting for their claims to be processed. These 48,000 applicants, though, are not a monolithic group of people. In some cases, they are people who are working very hard to establish residency in Canada, which is, there are periods of time where residency is required to be eligible. It will affect people's OAS periods. And so the department and the staff are working diligently with the cases that are still waiting for assessment, and that number continues to track downwards.
Monsieur Groen.
Mr. Groen said in a past answer that 97.5% of payments were accurate. So out of 7.7 million OAS payments, this means that there are 192,500 mistakes. Who corrects them? Is that accounted for in the operations? And is that why there is an additional $473 million? Thank you for your question. For all benefits programs, we have accuracy targets. This is something that has existed for decades. It's a process that's audited every year by the Auditor General's office. And we have something similar for all major benefit programs. So EI, OAS, and the target is 95%. As you have mentioned, our success rate is 97.5% for OAS, and it's a bit higher for the CPP and a little bit lower for EI, but all within the targets. And that's based on practices around the world, based on the evolution of service standards. When there are mistakes, and the mistakes can happen for many reasons. Sometimes Service Canada makes mistakes, but a lot of mistakes are due to missing information or accidents made by the customers. So when we see that there's a mistake in the payments, we take measures to correct them. Is it possible for you to give us the list of computer programs that you have solved in the QRM system, as well as the unresolved issues? I think there's an important thing to highlight. You asked me a question about the accuracy rate. I think it's important to understand that existing mistakes and that were there before the new system, in most cases, the issues were not related to this system. But we can share the kind of mistakes that we have identified with the committee. Essentially, the most amount of mistakes came from June from last year, so close to 60,000 cases. How many of them are left unresolved? And how many have been waiting for a benefit for over a year? People who have waited for over 1 year? Almost no one. There are also some cases, and we're working with the customers to obtain more information. It's a minimal amount. These are really, really outliers. As the minister has said, there are currently 48,000 clients who are eligible for the benefit. But these are not people who have been waiting for a year. In most cases, they have waited for around 2 months.
Back for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Minister, thank you for being here today. I share your passion for skilled trades. My son's in the skilled trades. He's a carpenter's apprentice.
but I have some real concerns about what's happening in Canada, and I'm hoping we can talk about those a little bit today. You were the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development from 2017 to 2019. And in 2018, your government made a very troubling decision, at least I find it deeply troubling. You decided to remove union consultation from the issuance of temporary foreign worker permits. Can you give the rationale as to why your government chose to remove this safeguard?
Oh, I'm fighting with the mic person. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, person. Listen, I first of all just want to say congratulations to your son. What a fantastic opportunity to pursue a skilled trade, and hopefully he is as successful as my son is. It certainly turned out to be a very profitable journey for my family and my children, but obviously we'll be there to support your son through the process. Listen, I think it's very important that we work with unions on the issues of who's doing what work where, and I can't speak to those decisions, but I can say that there's a commitment on.
Minister, you're part of cabinet that made that decision.
I can say that there's a commitment on behalf of our government to make sure that we build good union jobs across this country.
Okay, so I mean, I can only assume you don't know why your government made that decision, or you won't answer it. In 2025, there were 126,000 unemployed skilled trade workers in Canada. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, your government issued 125,000 temporary foreign worker permits in Tier 0 to 3, which includes skilled trades. So can you not see that there's a major problem in having removed union consultation from the issuance of TFWs?
Our government has taken significant action in reducing temporary foreign workers across the country. And I would say, first of all, we're down 70% in low-wage positions and 50% in overall in terms of the use of temporary foreign workers. We've worked really closely as well with unions and trainers to make sure that we understand the nature of where that unemployment in the skilled trades is. And I would just, before you're anxiously jumping in, but I will just say that we are also working, as you know, with provinces and territories on breaking down labor mobility barriers that allow for people who have those skills to take advantage of.
You can't move if your job has been taken by a temporary foreign worker. And I gave you the numbers; they almost match. This is deeply concerning to me. You can be concerned too, right? You could say you could say. You know, you raise a very good point, and that shouldn't happen. And, you know, our government is going to commit today to commencing an investigation as to why we are allowing in skilled temporary foreign workers almost at the same number as Canadian skilled trades workers are unemployed. You could say that, and that would be welcome news by myself, by the construction building trade unions in this country. Are you prepared to do that today?
What I would say is the construction building trades unions are actually very thrilled with the spring economic update. And we, as you would know,
That's not my question. They're happy with that. That's not my question. Construction building trade unions call the temporary foreign worker program a way of low wage to exclude Canadian workers. So, why don't you just commit today? Just say, look, I agree. This is a major problem, and our government is going to look into it to make sure this doesn't happen again. It seems pretty simple to me.
Well, I think, first of all, Mr. Seaback, I don't think you should tell me what I should say, but I will say this. We have committed to working with building trades to make sure that it's Canadian talent that builds Canadian products. That's why That's why we have invested the $6 billion in the trades. And since we're talking about the CBTU, in fact, this is what Sean Strickland said. He said, we've never seen anything like that from any government in terms of support for skilled trades and skilled trades training in Canada. Our union halls are full of resumes and folks trying to get in, and one of the challenges is how do we retain them? He's so excited about this new investment, in particular around helping people once they become apprentices to complete that apprenticeship, that he,
about one thing and unhappy about another, right? This exists in reality. What I'm pointing out is a problem. You're pointing to something that's totally different. I don't understand why you can't say, look, I agree it's a problem. We shouldn't have 126,000 unemployed skilled trade workers while we bring in 125,000 through temporary foreign workers.
Well, I think what I have a problem with you doing is alleging that those people are exactly the same people. And what I would agree with is that we have to have Canadian talent building Canadian major projects. That's the point of this investment.
Thank you, Minister.
And
That
we're going to
concludes the
continue to work
time.
with the
Thank you,
building
Mr.
trades to
Stevak.
ensure that's the case.
We're going to carry on now with Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister for coming today as a witness. I guess the first thing is we have to identify that across Canada, the workforce issues aren't always the same. So I come from rural Canada, and there is workforce issues in rural Canada. And some of them are tied to the temporary foreign worker program and issues that are surrounding that. But one thing that we've done, and it's not necessarily in the spring economic statement, but the Canada Student Jobs Program that's been expanded this year is something that resonates in my riding office every weekend I'm home. We're matching up students with employers. In my riding alone of Cardigan, almost $1 million in benefit to employers to hire students for that experience, that first job. Do you want to just summarize, what you're hearing across the country with the Canada Student Jobs Program, Minister?
Yes, and thanks for the question. And in my writing as well, this is something that employers and young people look forward to every year. It's 100,000 Canada Summer Jobs across the country this year, where young people get an opportunity to work for employers, not-for-profit organizations, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, public sector, private sector. It's obviously young people earn money. Employers get the opportunity to test run great talent and to help a young person refine skills, develop skills. Oftentimes the biggest barrier for a young person is that first job. Getting that first job, ironically, is a really hard thing to do, and it prevents people from, securing the next job. But Canada Summer Jobs gives young people that first employer, that first reference, that first experience. It also gives young people an opportunity to test run a sector that they think they might like to pursue. Maybe they'll confirm their interest in that sector. And I've also heard young people say, I worked in that sector for 4 months, 3 months, I decided it really wasn't right for me, and now I want to try something else. And so we consider Canada Summer Jobs as an essential component to young people's not only earnings, but also their experiences in terms of determining for themselves what their future looks like.
Okay, and thank you for that answer. Second thing I was going to point out in the economic update, we identified a labor gap in the EI program for those plants like a snow crab plant that can only process crabs so long. And so the 5 weeks of extension that was extended in the spring economic update, can you speak how that helps these regional economies? Because they need trained, skilled workers too. And if the EI runs out, those people have to move on to other parts of the country. So.
Absolutely. And look, we've spent a lot of time trying to get EI modernized to the degree that it's going to help people with economic shock, that it is going to help ensure that labor mobility is not the only answer to a solution for a seasonal worker like the ones you're talking about. And that's why we have extended EI for seasonal workers in 13 targeted regions until October of 2028. This is 5 additional weeks, as you point out, to help people get through those difficult weeks, but with a light at the end of the tunnel, knowing that their job is coming back. My mother was a seasonal worker, by the way, as a school bus driver when I was a young person. It's very stressful for people if they don't know that they're going to be supported through that period of time where it might be difficult for them to get another job, but there is a good job waiting at the end of that particular time. And so thank you for raising that. I will also point out that we've been working on ensuring the EI program can keep up with the pace of change that we're seeing, in particular with tariff-impacted industries, and ensuring that people can get rapid access to EI, that they can keep their separations earnings, and that they have the support in partnership with provinces to get that training that you're talking about for the next job.
And obviously, Minister, we want everyone to find a job and work. That's our goal. And we see in the labor market improvements to the deduction amount. So from $4,000 to $10,000. That may not be directly in your department, but can you just speak to how that's helping? Because everyone I talk to that's working, electricity grid, startup companies in the modular business, they're all going to need a mobile workforce. And as we train these red seals and the jobs are in community A instead of community B, we have to give them benefits so they'll be transferable.
Well, in fact,
You have
that's
about 10 seconds for a
I have 10
response.
seconds. Yes, we have increased the labor labor mobility deduction for tradespeople from 4,000 to 10,000, indexed to inflation, and reduced the distance, importantly, from 150 to 120 kilometers.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Lemire pour 2
Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Minister, during the first hour of this committee, I was not impressed by the answers of Mr. Countryman, who was the Director General for Federal Provincial Relations at the Department of Finance. I asked him questions about $6 billion in the economic update for a strong Canada that goes through salary subsidies. I think you're aware of that program. Did you consult the government of Quebec before creating that measure? And you know that since 1997, there has been an agreement between Quebec and Canada on training people, and that may create conflicts in Quebec. We're working with the provinces and the territories. We're working very closely. We have another meeting in July in Halifax to talk about this approach. More specifically for Quebec,
for skilled trades workers across the country, and we're looking forward to hearing some of their lessons learned in terms of the work that we're doing with, in particular, building trades unions across the country.
Évidemment, le ministre du Travail du Québec, Jean...
Of course, the Quebec Labor Minister, who is a federalist, said that he was surprised by how much the federal government meddled in his jurisdiction. And your answer makes me assume that you are open to allow Quebec to have the right to fully withdraw from this agreement with no strings attached if you want to respect the 1997 agreement? We will work with Quebec because I think that there are measures in the spring economic update that are also very useful to Quebec. I will talk to the minister and other ministers in July in Halifax. You brought up temporary measures to fill the black hole of EI. Why not make them permanent?
These measures are in place until 2028, and we'll continually assess the need for the measures on an ongoing basis.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lemire. We'll continue now with Mr. Halon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'll quote you. You said that you will drive forward an agenda to grow the strongest economy in the G7, and that is exactly what we are doing. And now your government just drove Canada into a recession. In fact, Canada is the only G7 country in a recession now due to your government, a full-blown Liberal recession. Can you tell us why?
Thank you, MP. Listen, first of all, I want to be very clear. My role here today is to make sure that the employers who are telling me on a regular and ongoing basis that we have a skilled trades shortage in this country can get the labor they need, because this is an actual limiting factor. When I look at the major projects list
Minister,
and the projects
I'll get to the employment part.
So, for example,
can you answer why Canada is in a recession today when you and your government promised we would have the strongest economy in the G7, and you said that you would grow the economy? We found out on Friday, due to your Liberal policies, Canada is in a recession. Can you tell us why? Because the Prime Minister refuses to answer any questions.
That is a dog's breakfast of a question, I will say. I mean,
Why
I
are
think
we-
the Prime
why are
Minister
we in a
has
recession,
regularly
Minister?
answered questions in question period as well as in the media.
That's why I have to
and
ask
I will
him again,
say
'cause
that
you don't answer
conflating, you know, the situation that Canadians are facing
Because of your government.
when I think Canadians are wise enough, and certainly the Canadians in my riding who come up to me all the time and talk about not only the concerns they have, but the opportunities that they see in terms of a strong Canada. I think that the important piece to remember is that
So, Minister, you
every step
mentioned a
of the
strong
way,
Canada,
as we
but
support
now
Canadians
Canada's in
through
a
this time
recession,
and build
and you
Canada
can't answer
strong.
why. Can you tell
Sorry,
us
I'm
why?
just going to have to, can you just let the minister respond quickly and then we'll go to the questions for the interpreters? Thanks.
I would say that we're doing three things. One, we have our mind on the pain that some Canadians
Minister,
are
I have a
feeling
limited amount of time, and you refuse to answer the why
Well, I
we're
haven't
inside
been
of a
able to.
recession. Now, you know, you are talking about growing a strong economy, which we know is not true because now Canada is in a recession. Can you tell us why other G7 countries are not in a recession, even though they are facing the exact same external factors as Canada is?
I would say that our focus has been very clearly on the affordability for Canadians. And my question back to you is why you keep voting against the very Canadians that are utilizing I'll name one. You're from Ontario, correct? So in Ontario, well, look, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly where you're from, but you're from Ontario. In Ontario, a family who has a child in childcare is now saving an average of $13,000 per year per child. Maybe you've never had to pay for childcare, but I certainly did as a single mother,
So,
and
Minister,
I can
I'm
tell you
actually
this
from
makes
Alberta,
a giant difference.
And we are the province that your government has repeatedly attacked, especially our resources. But thank you. Now, I have to ask you, just in the beginning of this year, because you keep saying build Canada strong, in the first 3 months of this year, 120,000 full-time jobs were lost. Can you tell us why?
Well, since you're from Alberta, and I apologize for not knowing that, I will say that
I've moved on. There's another question
in
in
your
front of you,
province, under early learning and childcare, families are
120,000
saving
jobs were lost in the first 3 months
$13,000
of
per
this year.
child
Can you
per
tell us
year
why?
in Alberta as well. And so every step of the way, as we've worked for people in Alberta, as we've worked
Minister,
for people in Ontario,
in the first 3
we
months
have
of this
seen your
year,
party vote down
120,000
measures.
jobs were lost. Can you tell us why, please?
As I have said repeatedly, we are here for two important reasons. One, to support Canadians with the affordability.
What about the 120,000
and to
workers
I'm sorry,
who lost
Madam
their
Chair,
jobs
I can't
because
seem
of
to
your
get an
government?
answer out
Yeah,
without being interrupted.
Please go ahead, Minister.
Yeah. And secondly, to make sure that we have in place the measures that will grow our Canadian economy even stronger.
I'll take that as a
for
non-answer.
example,
Minister,
the
in
Shell
your
Polaris
opening
project
statement-
in
Sorry, Minister,
Alberta.
if you would allow MP Halan to ask his question.
Yeah. So, Minister, in your opening statement, you claim that you guys are going to be building more homes. Your government promised to build 500,000 homes a year. Your own housing agency says that's not true because housing starts will decline, and there needs to be 280,000 homes just to get to affordability. Can you explain when, or give us a date on when 500,000 homes a year will be built? We just need a date.
Well,
you have about
in
10
Alberta,
seconds left.
MP, housing has received over $75 million for homelessness
You
services.
guys made the promise. When will it be
Madam Speaker,
fulfilled?
I'm sorry, I can't even answer.
Because there's no answer.
Thank you. That concludes your time. We'll continue now with
Wow.
Mr. Sawatsky for 5 minutes.
That's what I wanted to do.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. Really appreciate all of the great work you're doing for Canadians. In my riding of New Westminster, Burnaby, Millardville, I have the privilege of representing many union workers, apprentices, and families who have helped build our communities and, of course, this economy. This spring economic statement, economic update proposes $225 million over 5 years for the Union Training and Innovation Program to help union-run training centers upgrade facilities, expand capacity, and invest in modern equipment. So how will this investment strengthen Canada's training infrastructure and help ensure that workers have the skills needed to deliver housing, infrastructure, energy, and nation-building projects that Canadians are counting on?
Well, thank you very much for the question and for giving me a few moments to answer it. It's really, it's really important that we work closely with unions and union training organizations as well as polytechnic institutions who are doing this really incredible work of not only recruiting people to the trades, but making sure they get through that skilled trades training. Nonetheless, even with all of that support, many apprentices say it's difficult to get to the completion. Partly that's because hours can come and go. People are oftentimes reluctant to hire that first year apprentice. And during periods of slowdown, either through training where people are losing earnings, or if in the case of layoffs in the construction sector, employees or apprentices can find it very challenging financially to stick with their training. And so what unions have been calling for is exactly what you found in the spring economic update. That's why we've received such accolades from colleagues across the country, union colleagues, polytechnics and institutions, trainers who are saying we can do a better job not just attracting people to the trades, but making sure they get through that pipeline of training. We've got a lot of apprentices right now who are really looking forward to getting these financial supports that will help stabilize their income so they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay their mortgage or their truck payment, but rather they can focus on that next block of learning that's going to get them that much closer to their Red Seal. And the Red Seal is really the ticket that allows someone to continue to be able to not only earn a great living for themselves and their families, but also build the major projects like the ones we were just talking about in Alberta that I would have mentioned had I had the chance to do so.
Thank you, Minister. One of the things which I'm most happy about right now, seeing the direction of the government, is the extent to which we're investing in young people. We're helping their education, skills development, pathways into good jobs. Programs like Canada Summer Jobs, the Student Work Placement Program, Youth Employment and Skills Strategy, and Enhanced Student Financial Assistance. We're helping them with experience, training, job opportunities. Can you tell us how these investments are creating these opportunities and setting young people up for long-term success?
Well, and thanks, and it's great to get a question from a young member of Parliament like yourself. It's just on a personal note, just really affirming to see so many young elected members of Parliament in the House of Commons, because you have such really relevant experience and really lived experience right now. So in terms of the work that we do to support young people, I would say that the first thing to note is we transfer $3 billion to provinces and territories every year to help with this work. So we're not the only game in town. What we do is to add on to those transfers to very specifically focus on a few different categories of youth. One, youth that might be having a really hard time getting that first experience, or in some cases haven't completed their education. There are not-for-profit organizations, public institutions that do really important work to make sure people don't, I really believe that everybody deserves a second chance, and that sometimes people leave school because of circumstances in their life that are really hard to handle. And there's nothing worse than seeing someone who hasn't had that second chance get further and further away from employment. And so the work we do with those groups, I think, are critically important, not just for their outcomes, but for the outcomes of Canada, to help make sure people get to that full potential, that the promise that they have for our country. But secondly, we also make sure that we support young people with things like Canada Student Loans and grants, other experiences, youth work experiences like the Canada Summer Jobs Program, and those student work placements that I talked about for post-secondary students that are really looking to hone in what they're learning and match that up with what really is happening in the workforce.
Thank you. And just to expand on your point about the Canada, how the government is extending Enhanced Canada Student Grants and interest-free Canada student loans for the 2026-2027 academic year. That's expected to help hundreds of thousands of students across the country. I know a lot of people are really struggling with.
Thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. That concludes your time.
Well, good job doing that.
We're going to, on va continuer maintenant avec le.
Final round of questions. We have about 8 minutes. We will start with Mr. Lefebvre for 4 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I want to go back to QRAM. It was supposed to initially cost $1.75 billion, and it's now $6.6 billion. and $500 million were added to it in the economic update. It is now one of the biggest financial scandals in Canada, and the system is not even working. We met last March, Madam Minister. I reached out and invited you to meet the employees who use this system to see what's not working, and you said that you will think about it. Were you able to think about it and accept my offer?
Met with Service Canada employees in my own riding. I was in Marathon, Ontario just a few weeks ago, and I stopped at the Service Canada office in Marathon. Now, Marathon is a very small community, only 6,000 people, but they have an incredible team of Service Canada employees that not only help with issues that...
Madam Minister, I'm talking about employees who use the Curam software. I'm not sure if you noticed that I left the meeting a few minutes ago. Did you see that? I left the meeting a few minutes ago.
Say
Non, mais
that. In
attendez,
fact,
Madame la
Service
Ministre,
Canada-
j'ai pas terminé.
I'm not done. Madam Minister, I am not done. I left the meeting a few minutes ago because I was on the phone with one of your employees who is using the Curam system, and that person told me that the system is not working. Employees want to meet you to explain why it's not working. They have solutions for you, but they're telling me that they're not being listened to. They wrote to me. I have a letter. I just answered a call from one of your employees who told me that it's not working. That person has solutions. He's ready to meet you. I offer you an invitation to meet these people. It's the biggest financial scandal in our history. You need to show leadership. Are you ready to be a leader? You think this is funny? There are 48,000 seniors right now who are not receiving benefits. They have to wait 8-9 months to receive their benefits. And you dare to answer. Madame Lefebvre, Monsieur Lefebvre.
Interrupt. I know my colleague is very passionate, but he's raising his voice to a level that it may actually have acoustic shock for our interpreters. I know you value the work of our interpreters, but we try not to yell into the microphone. I know I've made this mistake myself a couple times, being very passionate as I am. So I just wanted to caution the member through the chair that we really value our interpreters. So.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. And I would just like to remind Monsieur Lefebvre to, I understand there's passion here, but to keep the tone low for our interpreters.
Madame la Présidente,
also,
merci à
Monsieur
merci
Lefebvre,
à
I'm
mon
not quite
collègue.
done yet. Monsieur Lefebvre, je n'ai pas encore fini. Pas terminé, merci. But also just to maintain a respectful tone as well. Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre.
D'accord.
Okay. I continue. Hearing from you, Madam Minister, of course, gets me worked up. There are currently 48,000 seniors who have been waiting for after their benefits for 8-9 months. They have a hard time paying rent and to buy food. There are employees that I've just called from Service Canada who are ready to provide answers and solutions, and the minister is laughing. These people are our seniors. They built our country. They paid taxes their whole lives. And you think this is funny, Madam Minister? This is not dignified. You need to show leadership. You need to rise to the occasion. You need to control this file. And once again, I invite you, Madam Minister, to meet the people who are calling me. Is there a question? This is the question. Are you ready to accept my invitation to meet with employees? I have met with many employees. No. The employees have confirmed that you did not meet them. That's not true.
Mr. Lefebvre is talking over the witness. The minister's here trying to answer the question that he's asked, and the interpreters, again, have a very hard time interpreting when people are talking over one another. I can't even make out what anyone is saying. As an Anglophone, I know we often consider the various languages that are spoken in committee, but I'd like to understand what the minister is saying in response to your question. So if you could not speak over her, I would appreciate it.
Point of order, Mr. Garon.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'ai gardé...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will be quick. I know that I was replaced during the first parts of the meeting. I'm not sure how we got here, but I want to know whether when we have a witness, when they laugh at a question, can that seen as a breach of privilege?
But, one second, Minister. Monsieur Lefebvre, I would just like to ask everyone to not talk over each other for the sake of interpreters, but also for the sake of committee members who want to be able to understand in either official language. Monsieur Lefebvre, you have about 6 seconds left in this round.
Well, Madam Minister, I just want to say to you that your employees have told me that you have not met them and they have solutions for you. So once again, I invite you to meet them. Thank you.
With Mr. Letao for 4 minutes.
Thank you.
Hello, Madam Minister. Thank you for being here.
To business at hand, talk about C30. But before we get there, I'd just like to say that Canada is not in a recession. We will have plenty of time to discuss that tomorrow, I believe, with the motion of the Conservative Party. But the huge consensus in Bay Street, for example, amongst economists is this is not a recession. In fact, on a per capita basis, GDP was up 0.9% in Q1. But let's go back to C30, let's go back to construction. We talked about that as well. And as my colleague, Mr. MacDonald, mentioned when he was discussing issues with you, Minister, situation in Canada is different from province to province. And I think that in construction, that is actually a great example of that. In my own province, in Quebec, in fact, construction is doing very well, not just on the residential side, but also on the institutional side. We see a lot of projects going on. Hydro-Quebec, the provincial utility, is investing heavily in expanding its network. So there's a great demand for construction workers. We understand Ontario, there are some specific issues with the high-rise condo market. But in other provinces, there's a great demand for construction workers and the lack of skilled labor in construction. So that's why we have all of those apprenticeship programs. Could you perhaps, because I think you didn't have time before to really explore that, but particularly in construction, the measures announced in the update, how do you think that will accelerate the pace of training young Canadians to work in construction?
Certainly, it's our hope. Thank you for the question. And certainly, it's our hope that with the combination of the work that provinces and territories are doing, that these additional measures could speed up the completion by up to 50%. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, and by the way, this is not cutting corners on training, not reducing training or ratios, anything like that. So there has been some concern expressed about that. This is not at all going to in any way interfere with the jurisdiction of provinces and territories on training hours or ratios. But what we think we can do is support the modernization of the Red Seal process. You know, in Ontario, for example, in my son's trade, it's hard to believe, but people still carry a paper logbook to account for their hours that they're accumulating towards their Red Seal certification. And sometimes those logbooks get damaged or they get lost, and believe it or not, people have to start over accumulating those hours again. That's a huge blow to somebody's journey. In fact, it can really set people back in some cases years if that unfortunate occurrence happens. There are other things though as well. People talk about how challenging it is to do the testing. If you're not in a major center and you're not near a test center, you may have to drive for hours. You may have to stay overnight, in fact, to go to a testing center in Northern Ontario. You may have to go to Thunder Bay or perhaps one of the other large or small towns to be able to do your testing. We're proposing to examine with provinces and territories things like some online learning, some online testing, ways that we can streamline getting a national apprenticeship number so that people, if they are studying in Alberta, don't need a new apprenticeship number in Ontario and can carry on their apprenticeship training in the province that they're moving to. So there are a number of different ways that we can do this, but it all requires good collaboration with provinces and territories.
Thank you, Minister. Do we have any time left?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much for your time today. Colleagues, we're going to take a brief suspension and start the next panel at 6:45 sharp. Thank you. final hour. I would like to begin by welcoming our witnesses. We have from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, Mr. James Gennaro, the Director for Policy and Government Relations. From the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, we have Maureen Hahn, the President and CEO. From Community Living Toronto, we have Brad Saunders, Chief Executive Officer. And from March of Dimes Canada, we have Amanda McKenzie, National Director, Public Affairs, Advocacy and Strategic Communications, as well as Jeff Willibond, the Chief Accessibility Officer. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating via video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that questions can be posed in either official language, and so therefore, if you require interpretation, please set up your earpiece now so that we can use the time we have effectively. And a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we will begin with Mr. Gennaro from the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today as part of your study of Bill C-30 on the Spring Economic Update. My name is James Gennaro, and I'm with the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. We are a pan-Canadian organization focused on caregivers, which is to say parents, siblings, friends, and neighbors, as well as care providers such as personal support workers and direct support professionals. We cover the full spectrum of care, from supporting children with disabilities to lifelong mental health challenges to aging and end-of-life care. Our goal is to make Canada the best place in the world to give and receive care. My commentary today will focus on the proposed amendments to the Disability Tax Credit, colloquially known as the DTC. These include, but are not limited to, allowing more medical professionals to certify DTC applications, and critically, simplifying and streamlining certification for certain long-lasting or lifelong medical conditions, including amputation, significant autism, and Alzheimer's disease. These measures are a significant step forward for people receiving the DTC and the caregivers in their lives. My organization has been advocating for precisely this and similar reforms for years, and we are very happy to see these measures being considered. 1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver today, and half of us will be a caregiver at some point in our lives. Our recent report, Caring in Canada 2026, showed in, frankly, hard numbers what caregivers and recipients of care know far too well. Caregivers are not doing well, and they are in urgent need of support from their government. Caregivers' number one need from our report is for financial support. Nearly half of caregivers have experienced financial strain due to their care responsibilities. About a fifth of caregivers are spending $1,000 or more every month on out-of-pocket costs such as nutritional supplements, paid care work, and incontinence supplies. Moreover, approximately 20% of caregivers have stopped saving entirely, which jeopardizes both their ability to manage personal financial shocks, like a lost job, as well as long-term prospects for their retirement. Unfortunately, the impact of this financial strain, alongside the physical, emotional, and psychological toll of caregiving, is that 77% of caregivers say their well-being has suffered as a result. Moreover, 61% of caregivers say they do not feel supported by their government, and 44% are disappointed in progress to date on caregiving issues. Measures such as those being studied today respond to many of the felt needs caregivers tell us they experience every day. Nearly a third of caregivers manage the tax and financial administration of the care recipients in their lives, the vast majority of whom would benefit from the DTC. Unfortunately, though, more than half of caregivers are unaware of tax supports like the DTC, and only 13% have accessed them. Delving deeper into our data, it becomes clear that the administrative burden underneath the DTC is a major barrier to caregivers accessing the credit themselves or on behalf of a loved one. Now, though it may seem pedantic to talk about administrative burden, remember that caregivers and the people they support are dealing with the DTC in addition to reams of other paperwork attached to federal and provincial credits, benefits, and other programs. Though all well-intentioned and essential, the combined impact is a never-ending series of nearly identical forms, unnecessary medical appointments, and subsequent waiting periods as you wait for one program to unlock another. The changes you're debating will make it easier for current and potential beneficiaries of the DTC to access this important support and eliminate some of the administrivia that comes from being a caregiver or a person with a disability in Canada. Critically, this will also unlock the Canada Disability Benefit for many people who need financial support. This is truly an important step forward for caregivers and recipients of care, and it has my full support. My hope, though, is that this is just the beginning, and that comprehensive work will be undertaken to reform the other tax measures that tend to go hand in hand with a DTC, including the medical expenses tax credits, as well as, of course, making the Canada Caregiver Credit refundable. All these measures taken together could be the basis of a national caregiving strategy, which has been promised by this government in the last election. Such a strategy would provide a coordinated framework to better support the 1 in 4 Canadians who is a caregiver today. Caregivers are essential to our health and social systems, as well as to our overall productivity and long-term economic growth. Better is both necessary and possible. I look forward to the committee's work on this bill. Thank you for your time, and I welcome your questions. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Gennaro. Just before we continue, I've been informed by the interpreters that, unfortunately, Mr. Saunders, because you weren't able to do the mandatory check. No, I'm sorry. It's just you won't be able to present because we have to do a mandatory sound check, and the interpreters, without having done that, won't do the interpretation.
Okay. I did resolve the issue, but sorry about that.
Yeah, so apologies. So you're certainly welcome to stay and watch. We just won't be able to hear from you.
Thank you.
So we will now continue with Ms. Han from the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, honourable members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Maureen Han. I am the President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, CCRW, working with folks with disabilities to ensure inclusive, meaningful employment across Canada. You're going to hear two things from me today that may at first seem contradictory. First, I want to express genuine appreciation for the measures in the Spring Economic Statement to improve the disability tax credit. Second, and more fundamentally, I will submit that the DTC has functionally evolved, out of necessity, into the entry point for disability-related programs and benefits. We believe that eligibility should take a different, modern, comprehensive approach to federal disability eligibility outside the tax system. The changes proposed in the Spring Economic Statement are meaningful. Streamlining the application process, creating faster pathways for certain long-standing conditions, and expanding the range of professionals who can certify eligibility will reduce administrative burden and improve access. These improvements reflect long-standing concerns raised by the disability community, and they will make a difference. However, the DTC is not, and was never designed, to be a system for determining disability or eligibility for social programs. It is a tax measure, a non-refundable tax credit intended to provide a modest tax relief. Yet today it plays a much larger role. A valid DTC certificate is required to access multiple core federal programs, including the Canada Disability Benefit, the Registered Disability Savings Plan, the Canada Disability Benefit, and the Disability Supplement to Canadian Workers' Benefit. In effect, the DTC has become the front door to the Government of Canada's disability support programs, which is a barrier because the DTC is administered through the Income Tax Act, and the Canada Revenue Agency tax policy is now functioning as disability policy. Decisions about who can access income supports and essential benefits are being filtered through a tax-based instrument. Put plainly, tax-based criteria are deciding who is disabled enough. This is not aligned with the modern disability policy approaches. It is inconsistent with legislated definition of disability in the Accessible Canada Act and with Canada's commitments under the UN Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities. The DTC relies on a narrow, highly structured concept of disability. This model does not reflect how disability is understood today. It does not adequately capture episodic disabilities, mental health conditions, or cumulative limitations. As a result, people with real needs and legitimate disabilities are excluded. And when this narrow test becomes the gateway to multiple programs, the consequences are compounded. A denial of the DTC does not just restrict a tax credit, it can block access to income supports and other essential benefits. This is why the National Disability Network has identified this issue as a key priority for engagement with the federal government. In its document, The Disability Agenda, National Advocacy Priorities for the Government of Canada, released today during National Accessibility Week, the NDN identifies this as priority number 2, a new approach to federal disability program eligibility. It points to 2 points to a different path. First, disability policy should not be anchored in the tax system. Eligibility for disability programs and benefits should be determined through a system designed for that purpose and not through a tax credit. The DTC should be an end, not a means, a way of delivering tax relief, not the mechanism that determines who can access essential supports. Second, the federal government should apply a consistent, modern definition of disability aligned with the Accessible Canada Act. I'm encouraged to report that Accessibility Standards Canada, of which I am proud to be a board member, is working with the disability community partners to develop a standard with a common definition of disability grounded in both the ACA and the CRPD for use across the Government of Canada. But the DTC reflects an older, medicalized model, creating a clear disconnect across programs. I see that my time is coming to an end, so I'll end there, and I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
You still have 45 seconds.
Oh, do I?
Yeah.
I can do it.
Okay.
All right. So the solution we think is clear: a comprehensive reform of the federal disability eligibility process that includes the development of a government-wide disability status determination process outside the Canada Revenue Agency. So let me close where I began. If we are serious about building an inclusive and effective disability support system, we must create a comprehensive reform. The improvements to the DTC are welcome and needed now. And at the same time, we need to commit to supporting an inclusive system that is based on need, grounded in modern policy, and accessible to those it is intended to serve. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Madame la Présidente, on s'est consulté entre les partis.
Madam Chair, we spoke amongst parties. And if it is okay, we would like to suspend so that the witness who was not able to do the sound test do the test, so I say we suspend and then he can do the test. Is the committee in agreement?
That our other witness can do a brief sound check, so please don't wander far. As soon as that's complete, we'll resume. Thank you. Suspend. First of all, I'd like to thank committee members for accommodating Mr. Saunders. Mr. Saunders, you now have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies for the confusion there. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm Brad Saunders. I'm the CEO of Community Living Toronto. Community Living Toronto is one of the largest developmental services organizations in Ontario, and we support children, youth, and adults with a developmental disability across the city of Toronto through housing and community supports, employment, and other programs. We operate out of more than 80 sites with over 200 leases, supporting approximately 4,000 people and their families. Our work is delivered by 1,200 dedicated and passionate staff who support people throughout their lifespan. As Canadians, one thing that truly speaks to who we are as a nation is our willingness to care for one another, regardless of race, religion, ability, or circumstance. Organizations like ours are on the front line of delivering these essential services. We are entrusted with public dollars, 80% of which come from the province of Ontario, and we use these carefully and responsibly to help improve the lives of some of the province's most vulnerable people. Living with an intellectual disability is a full life. It is a life of relationships, contributions, milestones, and meaning, shaped by the same hopes and everyday moments that define all of our lives. It can also come with some real challenges, navigating systems that weren't always designed with you in mind, advocating for supports that should simply be there, and working harder than most to access what others take for granted. That's why incremental progress matters. Not every change reshapes the landscape overnight, but the right changes made with intention move us meaningfully in the right direction. The disability tax credit was created to help ease these challenges, and it's a federal measure to help to recognize the added costs of living with a disability and to put a little support back in families' hands. It's a small shift in policy that carries real weight for families and individuals who spent years navigating recertification processes, medical appointments, and paperwork that asks them just to justify their lives. Until now, accessing that credit has required families to repeatedly document what everyone already knows. An intellectual disability doesn't go away. Parents and caregivers had to re-explain year after year the permanent realities of their loved one's life, not because anything has changed, but because the system required it. The changes that are proposed in the measures in the 2026 Spring Economic Update are great. This is an important and compassionate change. Under the reforms, a doctor or allied health professional will only need to confirm the diagnosis, not fill out 16 pages of documentation documenting how conditions are affected, how the conditions affect a person's daily life. For conditions like intellectual disabilities and Down syndrome and some forms of autism, the diagnosis itself will be recognized as meeting the eligibility criteria. Community Living Toronto welcomes the introduction of a lifelong certification under the DTC. A permanent diagnosis does not change over time, and this reform removes an unnecessary and burdensome requirement. This is meaningful process. As always, more needs to be done, but these are meaningful practical changes that treat a person with a disability with greater dignity and makes life just a little easier. They signal that government is listening. They free up time, energy, and resources that a person can put towards living, not just qualifying to live. We are proud to stand with the government in supporting these reforms, and we encourage the government to keep going because for the families of the people we serve, every barrier removed, every support given makes a difference. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Saunders. I'll now turn to the March of Dimes. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for inviting us to speak about the disability tax credit changes in Bill C-30. We appreciate the opportunity to address this really important issue. Madam Chair, just so that you know, both my colleague and I will be sharing the 5 minutes. We understood that we had 5 minutes as an organization. My name is Jeff Wilbon, and I am the Chief Accessibility Officer at the March of Dimes Canada, the country's largest disability service provider. For more than 70 years, we have supported people with disabilities to live independently in their communities. Each year, we work with over 30,000 people with disabilities, along with family, caregivers, community partners, advocates, and governments. Financial security remains one of the most pressing issues facing with people with disabilities in Canada. The disability tax credit is a critical gateway to federal benefits and tax credits that can materially improve dignity, autonomy, and independence, even if people, that is, can access it. I first began benefiting personally from the disability tax credit more than 30 years ago, and since then I've worked hard to ensure others in our community know about it and can receive it as well. I want to state clearly, the reforms to the disability tax credit in this spring economic update are a step in the right direction. We welcome them, and we want to work with government to go further. The disability tax credit was originally designed to recognize the higher cost of living with disability, but for too long, it has been more of a burden than a benefit for many of the people it's really meant to serve. The Canada Revenue Agency reports that over 96% of completed disability tax credit applications are approved, yet only 25% of people with disabilities have ever applied. That gap is not eligibility, it is about access. People don't apply because they don't know that the disability tax credit exists, because the forms are complex, because eligibility criteria is not clear, because accessing a primary care practitioner is difficult, and because uninsured fees of $150 to $400 to complete a form application create a barrier with no guarantee for approval. This result is over $2 billion in unclaimed disability tax credit benefits every year, and billions more in the downstream benefits like the RDSP and Canada Disability Benefit that require disability tax credit eligibility. The reforms announced, particularly expanding the list of conditions requiring only confirmation of diagnosis, represent meaningful progress. For someone with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy like myself, being able to confirm a diagnosis once and receive the disability tax credit for life is a profound change. It reduces cost, it reduces burden, and treats people with dignity. These are good first steps, and first steps really matter. Back to you, Madam Chair.
You're continuing on, I understand? You have about just under 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Amanda McKenzie. I work with Jeff at March of Dimes Canada, and I want to talk about how this issue is personal for me. I am both a parent and a sibling of people with disabilities and have actually applied for the disability tax credit twice. I was really lucky. Our family doctor understood my brother and my son, and I know the system and how it works. So I know that the changes in the spring economic update will have a very positive impact. I also know how much work the Canada Revenue Agency has done to make the DTC applications easier. And I want to thank and recognize the entire DTC team at the CRA for their hard work and partnership in working towards the reforms that we see. At the same time, though, there's a lot of ground to make up, and we're calling on government to go further in 3 areas. So firstly, we need to reimburse practitioners directly for completing DTC applications. Partial reimbursement after the fact does not help someone who cannot afford to pay the fees up front. Second, aligning the DTC's definition of disability with the Accessible Canada Act. The ACA definition is the federal government's definition of disability, and so wherever there's a definition of disability in federal legislation or policy, simply put, it should apply. Further to that, changing the ACA definition, as my colleagues have discussed, will facilitate future reform and provincial territorial alignment. And last, Canada needs a federal disability status that lives in our social system, not in the tax system. People who really need the DTC, like the people that we serve every day, say that the DTC unlocks don't access it because they say they don't make enough money to require a tax credit. So the tax system is the wrong home for disability status in Canada. We need a single portable status that a person establishes by telling their story once, and that unlocks access to all applicable federal benefits and more. Our friends in the European Union and Japan can show us the way. Our disability community in Canada has been clear and united on this issue. The National Disability Network has put forward concrete recommendations that reflect the priorities of people with disabilities across the country. We're committed to working all together to get this right. Thank you. We look forward to questions.
Great, thank you very much. I just want to take a quick temperature check of the members. If we're to end at 7:30, we have time for one full round of questions. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, perfect. Alors, on va commencer avec Monsieur Lefebvre pour 6 minutes.
Starting with Mr. Lefebvre, 6 minutes. Hello, and thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair. I have 4 daughters. My youngest is different. She is 20 years old. She has a mental disability. I'm very happy to have you amongst us today. I want to take one quick minute. There are too many organizations in my riding. In Victoriaville, there are people who take care of our children. And I want to give a shout out to Les Enfants des Incomparables, la Gang des Inserviables, amongst many others. They are groups with children who have special needs. And I would like to congratulate all educators who help our children. And now, to the adults, there is a special group for social insertion where these people go to work for businesses. I also like to give a shout out to the wood industry, with whom I worked last year to create inclusive employability. At our gala last year, we gave a special award to any business that works to reinsert these people into our societies. I would like to salute, for example, the great Sarajev, who went on stage to receive that prize. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to do this. This is so important. It's so important to highlight the work done to integrate our children, such as my daughter, Marie-Hélène. So I am disclosing my conflict of interest with our witnesses today, but I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your work. Earlier, I think it was Mr. Wilbond who said that 25% of people with disabilities who make a request for many reasons, maybe some of them aren't aware that this exists, but also maybe because the forms that need to be filled by a Family Dollar can cost up to $400, and yet they don't even know if they'll have access to the benefit. What kind of solutions can you provide us so that we can increase the percentage of people with disabilities who can benefit from this, because the program is there and the goal is for them to benefit from it?
For sharing your personal story with your kids, and I hope your daughters are doing well. It's an important question that you raise. So I think there's no one solution. There's a combination of things. I think the application package itself is not an easy process to go through. We need to simplify the application so that people can actually get through it and get the benefits that they really require. But at the same time, I think that we put the onus on practitioners, on doctors, to take their time out to be able to support their patients, and that's why there's a cost. The cost is not being covered by government. So it's out of pocket for those individuals that need to pay for it, and it is significant. And it's been climbing for a number of years. It's becoming more and more cumbersome for physicians to take that time to do it, and therefore it becomes more expensive for the family or the individual.
Merci pour la réponse.
Thank you for your answer. Do you think that the form can be shortened significantly? I took notes, but for example, when you have an intellectual disability, she has been living with such a disability for 21 years. And we would prefer to not have to fill out a form year after year to confirm that she has this disability. Can that form be shortened?
In fact, I would think that aside from actually shortening the form, as you say, I think we need to put it into plain language. We talk about easy language in Canadian society. We talk about plain language. Sometimes the way we communicate with the public is at an academic level in terms of language and in terms of interpretation and understanding things. So I think it's a combination of not only reducing the actual application package, but to put it in much more simpler language so that everyone can understand it, not just the doctors.
Merci. Thank you. I often criticize the government, but we were told that they already made it easier to recognize intellectual disabilities, and I'm happy to hear that. Earlier, I invited the minister to do something, but today I invite the government with a lot of sincerity. I would really like to be able to work with the government so that together we can find solutions to see what we can do to empower and to make it easier for people with disabilities, because I would like to remind people that only 25% of people with disabilities benefit from our programs. That's not the goal. The goal is to increase the amount of people with disabilities who can have access to that. So I know I'm repeating myself, but I asked the government if we can create some committee, think about this, maybe with you, to find solutions that will help us help them. Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. That is your time. Thank you. We will now continue with Mr. Turnbull for 6 minutes.
Witnesses that are here today. I come from the riding of Whitby. We have the Ability Center in my riding, which we're really, really proud of, because it is an organization that I think is recognized nationally as specializing in ensuring that people with different abilities can live the fullest lives possible, which I think is what we all want to support. And I know it's an incremental process. You know, we've done some things and constantly we want to do more. I think these changes we've heard are good ones to make the disability tax credit more accessible, simplifying, streamlining the application process, and notwithstanding the limitations that I think have been mentioned, how we need to go further, that it's narrow, the tax system may not be the best entry point, and I agree with lots of those sentiments and comments. But just, you know, from a very sort of user perspective, I mean, these changes strike me as really being meaningful. I know they're relatively small, but pretty meaningful for individuals that I've worked with through my office who have struggled to access the disability tax credit, and we've had to help and often go back over and over and over again to help them for years to actually get a disability tax credit. So these, can one of you speak to, and I'm not sure who the best person is, maybe Mr. Wilbond, maybe I could ask you, what really does this mean for our disability community?
I think that the disability tax credit and the changes that are suggested in the bill are fantastic. I think that, and I think that all of my colleagues have said this today, that they're definitely the step in the right direction. I think that what needs to be considered is this the right home for a social program for people with disabilities to make sure that people with disabilities do not live in poverty? And I don't know that it belongs in a tax system. I think it belongs in a social welfare system, and not being. And I believe my colleague Brad Saunders talked about the fact that many people don't think that they make enough income to apply for the DTC. I think that that's one of the issues why there's such a low uptake. It's not designed for people to get people out of poverty. So this is why we're trying. This is why the suggestion is absolutely phenomenal reform in the bill. We can move forward. We can move further.
Great, thank you for that. I'm going to...
Mr. Gennaro wanted to jump in.
Yeah, please, just quickly, because I want to share my time with Mr. Sawatsky, if there's any time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate.
Sorry, 1 second, Mr. Gennaro. We have 3 minutes left.
Okay.
So perhaps a brief response, Mr. Gennaro, and then we'll turn it over to Mr.
Certainly. Madam Chair, appreciate you indulging the impertinence of me putting my hand up to answer Mr. Turnbull's question. But I'll just say, Mr. Turnbull, I received a disability tax credit myself. I was born missing an arm and I've worn a prosthetic my whole life. My parents did the paperwork a long time ago. I received the DTC. It has very little effect on me because my income is quite high, so not much material impact, but it is from birth, and every year I don't have to reapply. But I have a friend, his name is Joe, very similar situation, but from birth, missing a leg rather than an arm. And in his case, every couple of years, the CRA asks him to reapply for the disability tax credit. So I was in the lockup when all of these measures were announced. My first call was to my home office. My second call was to Joe to say, Joe, once these measures are passed, you will no longer have to go through this rigmarole. So that is just one very specific, small example, but an impactful one on the lives of people with disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Ms. Han, I'm glad to see that the DTC has been well received, the progress there. You mentioned in your opening remarks eligibility and modernizing that process, and you mentioned how mental health conditions are not considered for DTC. I was just wondering if you could provide any recommendations for potential steps forward in that regard.
I don't have anything with me right now, but I'd be happy to get that information for you.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And also, I'd like to congratulate you and your organization on celebrating 50 years of advancing disability inclusion and helping build a more accessible workforce across Canada. That's huge. That's almost twice as long as I've been on the earth, so pretty cool. In your annual report for 2024-2025, you reported that 311 youth, including youth with disabilities, gained employment, and your organization supported apprentices with disabilities facing barriers to Red Seal certification, and 88% of the clients reported increased job competitiveness at the end of the service. So given that success, from your perspective, how would the measures contained in the Spring Economic Statement help improve employment opportunities for Canadians with disabilities, particularly in the skilled trade?
You have about 30 seconds.
I can reply to you in a written form because I think that that's a fantastic question, and I can give you a very comprehensive response to that. I think that there's some amazing things that are happening within the government right now, within the Opportunities Fund, within the Workforce Alliances, that we're desperately trying to make sure disability has representation within those Workforce Alliances so that disability is considered at the very beginning. And so I'd love to have that conversation with you.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. On va conclure cette heure avec Monsieur.
We will conclude with Mr. Garon for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank all witnesses for being here today. Overall, and I think this is the general mood here, everyone here understands that the DTC meets people's needs, but the design is not optimal. It's one of its weaknesses, and at one point it will need to be replaced by something better. That's what I understand. I'm not sure who said that the tax system is not the right entry point when someone needs help. And it reminds me of the saga of the lowering of the different tax levels when the government reduced rates on one tax level, and because tax credits are proportional to the taxes paid, then for some people it became more expensive based on the reduced tax rates. So the needs are there, but there's a disconnect. So the government had to partially correct that. That was done. The opposition parties did its work. So I have a question. In some way, you ask for a complete overhaul of help for people with disabilities. Do you think a simple benefit that is provided based on someone's condition, that's outside of the jurisdiction of the CRA, provided by another department, completely independent Okay, there may be revenue criteria such as the Canada Child Benefit, but something aligned to that, like that.
That's a great question. I think that we need to look at the barriers for people getting into any type of employment, school, education, training. It's the barriers. It's not the person. It's the barriers that the person faces. So that modernized understanding of disability instead of a medicalized model, but taking a modern approach, looking at the barriers that are around us that stop us from bringing the best talent that we have, the realness that everybody has inside them into whatever it is that they want to do. And looking at those barriers, I think, is what is the answer to your question.
Je vais arriver sur la question des barrières, parce que
I want to go back to barriers because I have a question about medical certifications. For example, let's take the budget allocated for tax credits as if everyone asked for it, maybe provided in another form, for example, benefits. I think that's a good first step. You talked about the work required for doctors and the fees for someone that need to pay, if someone needs to pay if they want to be qualified. A lot of people have told us that filling this out is a terrible experience, but replace it with what? Because the public wants accountability. And sometimes that harms people with disabilities if people don't think that only people who deserve it have it. So what should be the substitute?
What our position on this is that there should be a federal sort of disability status that goes through the social system as opposed to the tax system. Obviously, there's going to be some kind of gate that people are going to have to go through, but that gateway doesn't have to be what the disability tax credit gateway looks like right now. That's a highly barriered process. We see in other jurisdictions, like in the European Union and in Japan, that they have different systems where there is a national or even an international.
Ça, vous l'avez dit. Il me reste une minute. Le temps est 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes left, and time is very precious. We also need to talk about provinces. In a past life, I worked with adaptive companies in Quebec, so subsidies were given to businesses that integrate people with disabilities in their businesses. There's all kinds of criteria, for example, the industry, the status of the person. So the provinces do things. At the federal level, how can you ensure that that status can be transferred, for example, with Revenue Quebec? And are there provinces that do what you recommend?
But if the federal definition of disability was the Accessible Canada Act definition, that would encompass all of the different provincial territorial definitions that there are across the country, which would facilitate that alignment as reforms continue that we're all working toward.
Okay. Et avec la minute qui me reste,
I have 1 minute left. Can you talk about the models that exist? You referred to a few of them. So in places where it's working out, how is it working?
Japan, it's been around for decades and it works very well. The European Union has had their model in place for not as long. It's still under development and countries are still joining in, but it's a status that people are taking advantage of and they're using across the different countries of the European Union. So I would imagine that a confederation like ours would be able to handle it if the EU can.
Avec il reste 20 secondes, si quelqu'un d'autre a quoi que ce soit à ajouter.
I have 20 seconds left, so anyone else would like to add something?
Towards Germany, another federated country as well, where they've taken some steps around what is effectively a guaranteed basic income for people with disabilities. Once you go through one gate, it unlocks all sorts of other things for you, including a lifelong income as long as you need it. So I'd point you towards that example as well.
Madame la Présidente, c'était possible si les témoins...
Madam Chair, if possible, with the clerk, can the witnesses provide us with the documentation related to that so that they can be provided to the committee? Absolutely. If you can send something in writing to the committee.
like to thank the witnesses. Before committee members leave, we have 3 small items to approve, so don't go anywhere. But witnesses, you are more than welcome to log off and step away. Thank you very much for your time. Just before I let committee members go, we would have received a budget request regarding the study of Bill C-30. The amount requested is $16,750. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt this budget? Yep, thank you very much. Also, I would just want to remind everybody that for C-30, the amendments submission deadline is to the clerks is Thursday, June 4th at 2 p.m. So just a reminder there, and clause by clause consideration of the bill is scheduled for Monday, June 8th, 2026 at 3:30 p.m. And finally, with regards to the pre-budget consultations, I would like to be able to give the clerks and analysts some direction for the report, which I hope will be both concise and substantial. I understand there is a suggestion. Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, so I did speak to representatives from both the opposition parties prior to this meeting. So Jazraj Halan, in your guys' case, and Jean-Denis, who's here. I suggested that perhaps we could just give sort of light instructions to the analysts to start working on a what we heard kind of version of a report on pre-budget consultations. I think we only likely are going to have 1 or 2 more meetings on pre-budget consultation with witness testimony. And then what we had discussed was perhaps the last day the House sat for recommendations to be submitted by all of the parties for the pre-budget consultation report, and that could get compiled. We've since sort of talked about this and thought maybe it would be better to give a little bit more time. Perhaps July 3rd would be a more amicable deadline for all the parties. That gives us a little bit beyond when the House rises for the summer, just in case we need a little bit more time. So wanted to put that out there for consideration. It seemed like parties were generally in agreement, so I don't know whether people have changed their minds or not. I hope not, but that's what I wanted to suggest.
Monsieur Garon?
Effectivement,
Yes, we did speak, and that way of operating works for us. I just have a question. A lot of people have contacted us. They told us that a lot of briefs were sent to them in English, and however, the French versions are not available. They were provided to the Translation Bureau. A lot of people contact us to tell us that, and that delays our work. I want to know, how is that managed? How can we work with that constraint? It's quite problematic. It's nothing against the Translation Bureau, but the faster we need to go, the harder it becomes for us. I'm talking to the analysts and the clerks, and the Translation Bureau has made a compromise. They will complete all the translations before the House rises for the summer. So maybe wait until July 3rd before providing recommendations to the clerks. And like that, we can make sure that all briefs are available in both languages. Thank you. Are we in agreement with this calendar? Okay, with that being said, thank you very much, everyone.